Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning and welcome to the 28th edition of the European Biomass Conference and Exhibition. I'm very pleased and honored to be here with you in the first session of the conference. This is also the first time when this conference is a virtual e-conference online-only event. I'm confident that the capabilities offered by this virtual conference will fully meet your expectations. This is as well a real opportunity to have even wider audience and a global outreach. Until now, there are more than 1,000 registered participants from more than 77 countries all across the world. I am convinced that EUBCE will prove to be, as always, an excellent platform for interacting with others, sharing knowledge and innovation ideas on biomass, bioenergy, and bioeconomy fields. The European Biomass Conference and Exhibition has grown from a small research biomass conference more than 30 years ago to a well-established international conference with a real global coverage. EUBCE has thus become an outstanding event for the biomass community worldwide, and this year the conference is being held under the high patronage of Mr. Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic. New challenges and opportunities arise closely related to the European Green Deal and the need for economic recovery after COVID-19 pandemic. In this context of the green economic recovery, there is a major opportunity to address and enhance the role of biomass and bioenergy as part of a circular bioeconomy in the context of sustainable development. Therefore, the theme of the conference has put a focus on bioeconomy role in the post-pandemic economic recovery. To address the economic and social impact of the coronavirus pandemic, the European Commission has proposed a major recovery plan for Europe to drive faster economic recovery. Despite all challenges, this opens new prospects to advance toward the climate neutral, digital and circular economy by investing in sustainable infrastructure, financing innovative technologies and promoting a more sustainable lifestyle. Decarbonization is at the core of the energy and climate policy in the European Union. The European Green Deal reasserts the European Commission's commitment to tackling climate and environmental challenges to reach a carbon neutral Europe by 2050. Energy and transport are at the heart of the European Green Deal. More than 75% of the European Union greenhouse gases come from the production and use of energy. The energy transition is critical to achieve the zero carbon target. The energy transition, it's also a technology transition with multiple economic and social impacts. Renewable energy is critical for achieving the climate goals, complemented by a rapid phase out of fossil fuels. Biomass and circular bioeconomy have a significant potential to deliver on the European Green Deal objectives and to contribute to the EU climate neutrality goals. This year, EUBCE tackles, as usual, challenges ranging from biomass production and biomass conversion to bioenergy, biofuels, and byproducts, as well as sustainability aspects and policies. The conference will dig deeper into the role of biomass into the emerging bioeconomy and explore the contribution of biomass in energy and bioeconomy transition. I invite you to attend all the sessions of this conference, either live or later on at your convenience. I wish you to enjoy this time and take this opportunity to exchange ideas with your fellow scientists and industrial actors. Now it is time to invite you to listen to the first speeches of this conference. These two keynote speeches will tackle the major topics addressed in the whole conference. The first one dealing with the impact of the pandemic and energy security, and the second one providing us an integral view of the bio-based economy in Europe. After the two keynote speeches, there will be a short joint session for questions and answers, So I invite you to listen carefully and prepare your question. Now, I would like to give the floor to the first keynote speaker of this session, Professor David Chiaramonti, that will give the first keynote speech on the effects of the pandemic and energy security coupled to energy storage. Thank you. David, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the European Commission and to the organizers of the conference for inviting us to this opening. Okay, I will share my screen. Okay. So the topic of my talks is what has happened over the last months and what will likely happen, what we should maybe consider doing in the coming months and years. Pandemic had a real huge impact on economies and on our common life, and indeed there are consequences for our sectors as well. But I think there are also hidden opportunities in the post-COVID recovery plans. So I will start from the bottom, if I may say, in the sense that the results of our analysis is that the single European market in Europe hindered during these pandemic times. And also everybody immediately understood the relevance of domestic supply chain in our common life and in anything we do. We realize how important is having strategic storages and domestic chains available. Bioeconomy and circular economy, so far more of the attention and discussion focus on the greenhouse gas saving issue, especially in the EU, which is indeed probably the most relevant component of these sectors, for which sustainable transport are a significant and major part. But indeed, what I wish to remark today is that this value chain are also economies. It's bioeconomy. In that case, what I'm focusing is the second part of this word, the economy. And I wish to show that decarbonization and economic recovery are not in competition, but rather two sides of the same coin. You can get both in a win-win approach, if I may say. Summarizing, domestic supply chains in several sectors as food, materials, and energy are not only an option, are needed in this post-COVID scenario, right, to support the recovery of the European and global economy. So our thesis is that the economic impact of sustainable transport fuel chains that have to be well designed is as important as the effects on greenhouse gas emissions. So we started working on that early March. Then we came out with a publication in which Dr. Maniatis collaborated with me to analyze what was going on in the energy sector, addressing basically which impact of the renewable and recycled carbon fuels COVID had, and which role for this RRCF in the post-pandemic era. We introduced this terms renewable recycled carbon fuel because we want to be inclusive of of recycled carbon and even renewable electrical transport, all the transport mean that can be covered in a sustainable way should be grouped together and combine, collaborate, and be synergic. I have to say that most of the analysis in that period was focused on power, particularly on variable renewable energies as photovoltaics or wind, and the impact of this on the energy systems. You know, having a large share of variable renewable energy potentially has impact on the grid balancing and regulation issue. Other analyses were focusing on the oil only. We wanted to focus instead on the sustainable transport fuel. So let's have a look to energy market dynamics, first of all, and make a reality check. Actually, in the 4 years, 2015, 2019, energy demand and emission grew more than in the previous 4 years. In 2018, only 1/3 of $1,100 billion global energy investment were on low carbon, and the stated $7.4 trillion of G20 countries allocated to economic recovery, only 4% of that seems to go on reducing greenhouse gas saving. The oil was affected by $1,000 billion in 2020 compared to 2019, and electricity $180 billion. So it's a dramatic situation. Even more if we consider the investment in energy that are expected to decline in 2020 due to the situation, the profits that are reduced, the cash flows that are difficult, the debts, the reduced demand. Hydrocarbons should go down by 30%, renewable by 10%, but also electricity infrastructure will be affected by some 8%. Interesting to know that this investment level are in any case to be compared with those we would need to implement the energy climate transition. So actually the reduction in if we think in terms of what is needed to achieve this transition, well, these are even more significant and even more dramatic, if I may say. Underinvesting in this sector can generate serious consequences in the medium term. Reduced investment now will most likely result in some 9 million barrels a day reduced production at 2025. Rebound effect are in some way expected, and this could lead to increased energy prices when demand will recover. So in the specific part of biofuels, the fall is estimated by 13% in 2020, again due to lower demand and so on. In the energy sector, we have observed in the recent, even in the very recent days, this is June 30 press release on massive $22 billion write down by major oil companies, and shale giant being heavily affected by these very low oil prices. Just to remind that 240 North American shale companies filed for bankruptcy since 2015. Stranded assets are a major element today for consideration of these companies. Nevertheless, we observe announcement in oil sectors towards decarbonization, which is as ambitious as well. This is Shell, we have Total, new climate ambition to get to net zero by 2050, BP, Eni. So summarizing, we have a very problematic oil situation and a very ambitious statement from all measures towards decarbonization. And on top of this, the hydrogen is on the spot again. There's a program by the European Commission, and just a few days ago, these companies sent this letter to Vice President Frank Timmermans on the hydrogen strategy to be inclusive of all clean hydrogen pathways, which means also methane-based, for instance, or CCS. In the period of COVID, we have observed this, a huge fall of global supply. We observed the lack of oil storage increased from 9.8 to 123 million barrels in terms of floating storage just in April. Very impressive. Industry stocks recovery in 90 days forward demand also. And Brent prices went down even to below zero. That is true, was a very particular situation, but in any case, the prices almost halved compared to previous years. And this has an impact on jobs and economy, a very huge impact that will move well beyond the oil sector only. So we cannot forget that this is the situation. IEA has published, is doing a great work, really great, with many reports being released in this period, and showing and quantifying the expected and monitoring the impact of COVID on the energy area, especially the fuels. You see that oil and coal are the most affected ones, with more than 8% for the oil, and recovering on the bottom right graph is, however, expected to happen quite soon, and probably we are observing even a faster than expected recovery. Some sectors like this one, that is the jet fuel and the aviation in general, is indeed the most difficult one. I mean, transportation in air almost collapsed to zero during the COVID in the period of April, and is slowly taking over again. Regarding pollution, we have seen that local pollution was immediately benefiting, if I may say, from the lockdown. That's not surprising, but it's more interesting to observe that as regards CO2, this graph is from June 4 this year. In reality, the effect on CO2 was not observed. We need to keep, in theory, lockdown for some 6 to 12 months, being reduced at 20-30% to have a detectable impact on CO2. So again, this is a reality check, if I may say, on what would be needed to see an impact. Focusing now a bit on Europe, we are all well aware that on transport fuel, Europe is highly dependent on import. In general, EU is depending by 58% on import. This is the 2018 data. But if we look to the oil, this is almost 90% imported and represents 2/3 of 2017 energy import, followed by natural gas and then the other products. So it is a sector where EU is really paying a bill to import. Some countries like India, as stated in the EU-India conference a couple of years ago by the minister, are focused on biofuels as a mean to reduce the country dependency on import and to generate economy in the country itself. Let me take this slide from Professor Jürgen Kahr, that some years ago analyzed the German case, and the impact in terms of energy storage of transport biofuel is really big. He was comparing 1 million electrical vehicles, 10 gigawatt hour, the reference pump storage hydropower station at that time in Germany, 40 gigawatt hour, and the natural gas and liquid sector, and that is the picture. It's not by myself, as I say, it's Professor Jürgen Kahr from FAO, but it's really impressive. So we have to be aware that we have a potential there for security and for energy storage. Nice to see that Nobel Prize in Economy Professor Joseph Stiglitz, that was at our Polytechnic School a year ago in the technology fair that we organize every year, this year again in November. And he recently says that the countries will move towards shorter supply chains and emphasize self-sufficiency in food and energy. And that is exactly our conclusion, that we need this kind of approach that will invest the post-COVID economic and financial resources into the local economy. So we'll boost the economic recovery, and member state will get in return other benefits as value-added taxes, taxation, new jobs, permanent long-term jobs, and so on. We can combine this with other needs. For example, agriculture. In all Southern Europe, for example, we observe a great difficulty due to desertification, salinization, marginalization of land. The European Commission, through the Green Deal, is putting great attention to soil and to agriculture. And if we look under this perspective, the post-pandemic situation, this is an opportunity to combine methods from sustainable practices to recover this land, to support the farmers, to deliver multiple products. As I said, this is the picture in Europe and in particular Mediterranean area. You see, as documented by the European Environment Agency and JRC, and also European projects like S2Biome, there are million hectares, more than 8.5 million hectares of land that are suffering and need immediate intervention. A combined action of the common agricultural policy, the bioenergy policy, the bioeconomy action, can really bring added value to all these sectors. And in our small action of Bio4A, a European project targeting aviation biojet fuel, we are trying to deliver this kind of scientific insights with the European Commission, JRC, and other partners to investigate new means to combine these multiple products. Total will deliver jet fuel, and Camelina will be studied, and Neta is part in that project. The Farm to Fork has very ambitious goals as well, and some of this, however, will impact also on bioenergy. Manure use in anaerobic digesters, for example, is needed to go for organic farming and to deliver nutrients to the land that is cultivated through organic methods. So sustainable rotation, well-designed bioenergy value chain will deliver food, feed, and products, and also combine this kind of policies like Farm to Fork with other policies like RED, for example. And that is a key point for me. So bioenergy, bioeconomy can be enabler of sustainable farming and socioeconomic recovery. We should stop thinking in a linear way like that and asking ourselves how sustainable in terms of greenhouse gas emission we are. We should think in terms of biorefining, in terms of multiple products, with energy being a major component, and saying that way we can support agriculture to be more sustainable, especially in the most difficult land where the use of fossil and conventional fertilizers and the demand for water is higher, and the situation is worsening very soon. And in that way, support the economic recovery. So we should move from linear to circular thinking, from energy-driven to sustainable agricultural models and thinking. Well-designed domestic biomass value chain can support this post-COVID-19 economic recovery, can also bring carbon back to the soil, which is requested even in RED 2. And therefore, we need to integrate and couple the sectors, and therefore we need policy integration. That is a key point from my point of view. It is very difficult to have integrated and coordinated policies. I appreciate very much the EU Green Deal effort is actually an effort to have this kind of harmonization of policies. We have to think in an holistic way today. Problems are complex, are multifaceted, and therefore they need this holistic approach and coordinated approach of energy, agriculture, environmental, economic policies indeed. So coming to my conclusions, based on this first analysis of COVID-19, which is continuing, we will analyze what's going on in this month also, and apply some new model to the economic scenarios that are being that are possible, I would say, as of today. I think policymakers should consider acting at two different timescales. One is short, medium-term goal. We cannot disregard or forget that fuel companies are a component that is fundamental of the economic, with many direct and indirect business activities and jobs related to that. So we cannot take the risk of losing thousands of jobs and economic activities. So we need some kind of support these fuel companies in this short to medium term period to avoid collapse of these actions. But at the same time, starting right now, we should promote the transition, favor investment in these sectors, and promote higher amount of domestic renewable and low carbon fuels, so to inject this post-COVID economic recovery resources on this chain, and therefore having some returns at member states and European Union level, and also globally, in the real economy from the sustainable value chains. This job has to start now in parallel with the short, medium term action on supporting the most affected companies by COVID. We need, however, careful monitoring accounted for a number of elements. Rebound effect, for instance, shift to private transport from public transport, which has been the most relevant transport policy we tried to pursue until COVID-19, and that is an important means to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transport. But some rebound effects is possible and sometimes is already occurring. We should design policy to favor systemic versus short business-oriented benefits. It's legitimate, understandable, and correct that companies think in a shorter terms and more business-oriented. But as I said, injecting economic resources for obtaining medium to long-term goals has a systemic value, a value that is value for the union, for the countries. And so we should drive investment into that direction that will generate long-term benefit for the companies, but also for the communities. Finally, about resource spending, I didn't address too much that point, but non-performing loans and zombie firms are example of issues that are horizontal. They deal with all the investments in that period in this sector, and therefore also in our sector of sustainable transfer fuel, we should be very careful in not supporting companies that are actually not performing, and this loan would be actually money lost from other opportunities that could be more effective and generate a higher return, or even return in that some cases for the communities, because the main goal now is to recover our communities. So concluding, I still think that the COVID-19, that was a tremendous physical shock, not just financial, with long-term effect, also hinder opportunities for sustainable technologies and processes in general, and also in this transport fuel sector. And we have to drive these economic and financial resources in the best possible ways to stimulate investment into these long-term sustainable processes, stimulating innovation and green transition. This is the moment to act. Thank you very much for your attention, and ready to answer questions in case later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David, for a very interesting and very rich presentation. I myself noted several messages which are very interesting. We have to go to the next speaker, but before this, I would like to remind the audience that there is a button for question and answers at the bottom of your screen. In order to activate this, please move your mouse cursor on the screen, and please ask your questions to both of the speakers later on. Now it is my pleasure to give the floor to André Fay from TNO Energy Transition Netherlands, giving us an integral view on the bio-based economy in Europe. André, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I should still be able to share my screen. Yes. There we go. All right, we can start. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also, David, for a great start and overall context. And also thank you for the participants and audience to listen in on this remarkable conference, of course, all affected by a pandemic that was not included in most climate scenarios, but the climate scenarios are still there. And although on the short term, we have a major global upheaval of the pandemic, climate change is very much with us and is also, and that's maybe a strange word to use in the current context, fortunately recognized by many governments, by the European Commission and other bodies as something to tackle soon and even to link to the post-pandemic recovery. So we have a major global crisis, but also it may turn into an opportunity if used well. And what I want to do in this short presentation is to zoom in on the role of the bio-based economy on the European level in that recovery story. But it is, of course, an option that is not undebated. We have still a very strong discussion around how big can this role of biomass for energy and resources for materials actually be. Conflicts with food production, conflicts with biodiversity, etc. So there is still a very fierce discussion ongoing in many settings around the biomass option. So that is the focus of my presentation. What can we really expect from that option, and what are the key parameters, if you want, the key issues to tackle to make the option deliver in a sustainable way. First graphic, I think, is known to all listening in. The IPCC scenarios for the 1.5 degree scenario. On the left-hand side, a sketch where strong interventions, also in consumption, circularity, etc., may bring down emissions fast enough to do that. But on the right-hand side, a scenario which I think is more likely, where we have an overshoot situation within the carbon budget that's left for the 1.5 degree scenario, and where also later on, not only we need a very fast reduction of greenhouse gas emissions on global scale, but also negative emissions over time to compensate for that emission overshoot. The balance of options will, of course, be the story. So everything is welcome, everything should deliver. But that right-hand scenario is actually what we are in most cases looking at. So now focusing on biomass as one of the many mitigation options that can contribute to that. And the question is, how big can that role be? And what does it depend on? Well, the key factors are listed here. First and foremost, and that will be the key point of my presentation, is we need the sustainable biomass resources. If the resources are not sustainable, so combined with forest cover loss, loss of carbon stocks, etc., the option will not deliver. So that is a key issue to address. Then the next thing is, what is the role of biomass in competition, or in synergy, you can say, with other key mitigation options? For example, large-scale solar and wind that will deliver and unfortunately are delivering already. So the discussion is also a bit, to what extent do we need it? Then there is the element of the negative emissions, so BECCS, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, which is underlined also by the IPCC and many others, is one of the key ways to achieve these negative emissions. So to what extent may we deploy that? What about the carbon stocks? So that's strongly related to land use change, and what land do we use? How do we use that land? And of course, the greenhouse gas balances of those change. I will try in the short time given to address all of these points and point to the key critical elements. And then I'm afraid this slide is probably one of the most important ones and one of the most boring ones because of the amount of text. But I think it's also for the scientific community that is very much concentrated also in this conference, is a very important list of points. Because sustainable biomass resource availability depends on many points. And first and foremost, that is the balance in improving agriculture and also livestock management to save land, and that land can then be used for biomass production without expanding the land base into nature areas, into forest areas, etc. So avoid the indirect land use change. So that is one of the key interlinks we have to focus on for the future role of biomass. Linked to that is, of course, future food demand that will go up. And that is, of course, what you need to compensate, first of all, by improving agricultural efficiency to avoid land use expansion. But also on the other side, there are efficiency gains to be made, for example, in reducing food losses, which are very, very considerable on a global scale. And that is one of these elements that is partly ignored or partly underplayed in many recent studies even. And also alternative protein sources, partly that could be for human consumption, but partly also for fodder. For example, coming from algae, etc. So that is an element we also have to include in better future analysis. Then how do you use land? And especially the land crop combinations for biomass are very important, linked to land zoning. Are you talking about monocultures? Are you talking about mixed land use patterns where crops are intermingled? Agroforestry, for example. Those choices highly determine the ecological impacts of how you use land and how you may change future land use. And a key finding of that is that the impacts can be strongly steered to co-benefits instead of damages. So that is an important point that is often underplayed or ignored in many studies. Utilization of marginal degraded lands was already pointed out by David. At the moment, we're able to mobilize those lands and restore them by biomass production, for example, by reforestation. That, of course, is clearly creating multiple benefits as well. Then, on top of that, agricultural management practices that are more productive can also be chosen in a way that they in themselves lead to lower greenhouse gas emissions, more efficient use of water, more storage of carbon, less leakage of nutrients. So in mitigation strategies, also in the IPCC scenarios, those agricultural improvements are deemed necessary and highly desirable anyway, and they can be in combination with a lower footprint per unit of food. So this brings the key notion already that this is not a conflict between food, future sustainable food, and a future sustainable bio-based economy, but a synergy. That's a very important notion. And then, of course, you have to avoid competition with high-value applications. So taking away biomass for markets that are already important should be avoided. That's a notion. Good forest management, I will try to tackle that a little bit later on. And then the possible pleasant surprises from aquatic biomass, the algae, macroalgae, seaweed that are earlier development, but could also deliver. And then the punchline of this slide is that many, also recent studies, ignore parts of many of these key factors in their estimates. And I am still, as a scientist in this field for many years, frustrated by the high number of studies that point to possible damages, which is true. There are risks of wrong biomass use in production, but lesser attention for how the synergies can be achieved. Well, in a way, you have many of my key messages already. And then I will strongly speed up, because what about the underlying data? This is material that is, I think, very well known overall, that if we zoom in on the European biomass potentials, we can get stuck on the current level, basically the bar on the left, which is about 7 exajoules that we already use in terms of biomass. And some parties are pleading to reduce that use. For example, forest biomass is debated as we should not do that. We should leave it for increasing biodiversity, etc. So we may even have a declining supply in those views. But on the other hand, the possibilities just listed can also lead to a strongly increased biomass availability, even up to 30 exajoules compared to close to 70 exajoule total primary energy use in the EU today. So that is a very large potential. Well, the underlying factors that I have already outlined in that long textual slide, I'm sorry, I went down too quickly, can be explained that there are still yield gaps in European agriculture, especially in Eastern Europe, that could be closed over time in a sustainable way, for example, with the precision agriculture practices that we know already. And that can indeed release currently used agricultural lands and pasture lands. And those potentials have been studied already quite some time ago, can lead to releases, abandonment of agricultural land, depending on where you are, of 10 to 30% of what we currently use. Well, if we include that in a potential, so this is not about land expansion, food demand will be met, but we can produce more on the same amount of land if we may use that land in a more productive, in a more clever and a more sustainable way. And that can also be combined with pretty competitive biomass production, especially looking at perennial crops like trees and grasses, where we have a lot of options on the table. And then again, for example, in Eastern Europe, the production cost of these biomass sources can be quite competitive. So summing that up for different scenarios for the, let's say, less progressive and the more progressive scenarios, that explains a big part of this bandwidth that you saw in the current graphic. The key interlink is how do we deal with managing our agricultural and pasture lands? That is where the key of the solution is. And this also affects net residue availability. If you do that right, net residue availability, sustainable availability also goes up, etc., etc. And then what you see that can happen over time if we follow those scenarios of sustainable intensification of agriculture, that will lead to an increasing potential for biomass. And that's the yellow part, so cumulative growing avoided fossil fuel emissions because you replace fossil fuels. But there is also an increasing carbon stock, the green part. And that is the perennials displacing annual crops or the marginal lands being reforested. So we are not talking about losing carbon stocks, we are talking about increasing carbon stocks combined with these scenarios. The blue part are the cumulative agricultural emissions, which are always there, but also there you can reduce over time by the better practices, by including renewables in the energy supply of agriculture, but also in producing nitrogen fertilizers. So there are also reduction options there, part of that transition strategy. So this also illustrates that synergy. Then if we go for a while to the forest discussion, fortunately it's recognized that forests do absorb carbon, and that is in the biomass. When you use the biomass, CO2 is released, so there is a closed carbon cycle. Although even that is confused in some of the public discussions, but the which this carbon is regained, the carbon payback, is under debate. And that is understandable when you think about one forest plot that may take 50 years up to 100 years to grow, and you would cut that forest plot and use the entire forest for energy. It may take another 50 to 100 years to regrow. So that is where the concern comes from. And here you see a stylized graphic with all the carbon stock that is over time affected. But of course, in reality, a forest is managed as a very large area. Often on country scale, the bookkeeping of these forests is done. That is also part of the UNFCCC protocols. And many countries are able to keep their carbon stable, and even a lot of countries are able to increase it over time, especially on the northern hemisphere. So this graph kind of symbolizes that if you harvest one plot of a large forest area in a year, and you leave 99, for example, undisturbed, the 99 take up carbon all the way. So that means that overall, there is, in that sense, no change in the carbon stock. So when we see that in a more stylized graphic linked to key parameters that are discussed today, this is the line that you would get when you harvest one plot, and there is a carbon payback time. So that can be a long time. Now, if you take it to the landscape level, that in overall becomes a far shorter time. Now, there is, of course, the comparison when you do not harvest. So there can be a gradual increase of carbon. That is an older forest. I will come back to that in a second. And then there is, of course, the effect when you harvest that entire area all the time. There is an effect on the total amount of carbon stored. And that is then the so-called foregone sequestration. That's where debate is. But there is a couple of key elements to keep in mind that are often not mentioned here. If you harvest the forest also stays on average younger. It stays earlier on the growth curve. So per year, it absorbs more CO2 per hectare than an undisturbed forest. Also, an older forest reaches a saturation point at some point. And the management of the forest itself has a lot of impact on how much carbon is still in the litter, in the soil, etc. So the management practices can heavily influence what you lose or maybe gain in terms of what's called foregone sequestration. So forest management is the key to delivering sustainable forest biomass. And then first of all, you have to know what you're talking about, because the bulk of the biomass from forests is not coming from the whole stems. That's still going to timber and pulpwood. It is the residues that are used for energy. So that is a completely different discussion. That's often intermixed. Then the reported payback times vary widely, and that discussion is often linked to, okay, we assume that if we do not touch the forest will always be there, because if it is lost, then of course the CO2 is emitted, and then the stored carbon will not stay where it is. But what about the likelihood that in a 100-year period, which is a very important period for climate change, that forest will stay there compared to the risks of fire, of diseases, of competing claims? And these things are worsened by climate change. So the assumption that if you leave a forest alone, it will be an eternal carbon stock is becoming more and more unlikely. And the list of forest fires over the past couple of years in Australia, in Siberia, in the middle of Germany, and also on the West Coast, and even in the Amazon rainforest, make that a real concern. So managing our forests is also a very important adaptation measure to avoid these large fires. And that is a really underplayed issue in the discussion. So working towards sustainable forest biomass, well-managed forests, also new plantation on degraded and poor land, if you consider that a forest as well, is great. It adds forest. The management of the forest, so weed control, the planting, the replanting schemes, how do you harvest, all these things influence the effect, and it can be strongly steered. The Scandinavian experience in that sense over 4 decades have shown strongly increased bioenergy use, increased forest stands, and increased carbon stocks can be combined. And I think that is a real substantial experience for the rest of the world. Okay, then how much biomass are we going to use? And I will be quick here on the key messages. Here are 2 Schenke diagrams of extreme low carbon scenarios for the EU in 2050. Both scenarios will meet the Paris Agreement target for Europe. And on the right-hand side, we have a scenario with minimal biomass. So the 7 exajoule I mentioned is included there, but not more. And no CCS is also included. So that could be a principal choice. And we can do the job that way. So with a lot of wind, a lot of solar, some other renewables included, and then there will be a very high share of electricity, first of all, in industry and transport, but also power to X. So electricity used for hydrogen, CO2 chemistry, and then onwards to chemicals and fuels. And that is possible. But you can imagine that the spaghetti that the Schenke diagram represents also requires a completely different energy infrastructure, a very different energy system. That is also not easy to realize in 3 decades time that we are talking about, and also fairly costly. On the left-hand side is another extreme where we say we have that high biomass potential in Europe available, and we also allow for CCS. And what happens is that you see the biomass share on the left bottom side, that's going into 1/3 of the EU primary energy supply, going directly to industry, to transport, and also partly to heat. And that is to a sizable extent combined with CCS, leading to negative emissions. And that gives the special effect that there is still a possible budget, carbon budget in that sense, to use a share of natural gas that can also complement the rest of the energy system. That also does the job, and it means that the energy infrastructure that we have can to a larger extent remain intact. Of course, wind and solar also deliver to a substantial way. And both scenarios can do the job, but it is important that if you allow all options to contribute, you get a balanced system. And that gives generally by far the best outcomes for these mitigation scenarios. And that's summarized here. So when biomass is deemed sustainably available in the European scenarios, but also in national scenarios and in global scenarios, it is always tracked as a highly attractive mitigation option because of the low cost to deal with the transport sector, aviation, heavy freight transport, shipping, and also the feedstocks for chemical industry, for example. So it is, in that sense, a very attractive low-cost mitigation option compared to many others. What you all see in the scenarios is that optimal biomass shifts from heat and power today to advanced fuels, so the second generation biofuels, higher generation biofuels, and also feedstock for industry. That is where the key gaps are in the low mitigation scenarios or medium to longer term. And then the BECCS options are of major importance in these state-of-the-art scenarios for negative emissions. First of all, to compensate for that overshoot, but also to compensate for very difficult parts of the remaining mitigation obligation to go to 90–95% reduction. So it eases the pressure on some of these difficult parts of the mitigation efforts. And also what we see in the models that can accommodate that is that we do not have a conflict in that sense between biomass and green hydrogen and CCUS, but a synergy. So there are many process options in future industry. I will try to tackle that a little bit, that actually can be used in synergy. So it uses the biogenic carbon in a more effective way. It can lead to mixed biofuels, synfuels production, which you see is now also targeted by some industries and aviation biofuels, and it can also be realized in many future industries. So this is a very interesting field for innovation, further research, and also to lead to these low cost pathways. At the moment, we exclude biomass, so that was not that extreme in the European scenario I showed, but when you do that, it will strongly increase mitigation costs for countries or for continents, and it in most cases make achieving the 1.5 degree target impossible. So on top of that, scenarios that include the land use change and carbon stock impact show additional benefits if you do that well, already explained that. And this is now increasing evidence from many modeling exercises that include all these mechanisms, national level, integrated assessment models, etc. So briefly on the combinations of BECCS and then also using CO2. It is BECCS that can deliver the negative emissions, but combined with CO2 chemistry, green hydrogen, you can see very interesting process technology options for future industry and sustainable fuels. And that has, for example, been listed by the scientific advisors for policy by the EU academies, the SAPEA report, which I really recommend as a very nice introduction into this emerging field. So that's promising. And the fundamental reasons why biomass with CCS is turning out so well in these economic analysis is that the capture of CO2 in many advanced biomass conversion options, and actually many of these options we know very well. So hydrolysis and fermentation delivers pure CO2 that can be captured with limited additional cost. And that's also true for gasification platforms. And there are many other options, biochemical conversion pathways to biochemicals that offer similar possibilities. So this is one basic fundamental explanation why the biomass with CCS option stands out. So coming to a synthesis, if we if we manage the change that we are looking at for the medium to longer term well, we can achieve combining sustainable biomass resources with the efficient advanced conversion, look at mitigation percentage of about 90% compared to the fossil reference overall. And the key words here are well managed. It's well possible to mess up a chain and to have low greenhouse gas performance. We have many of these studies around, but at the moment we know how to manage a change well with the resources, the logistics, the right conversion. Then this is overall the perspective of a sustainable bio-based economy for fuels, also for heat and power, although we need that less in the medium to longer term from biomass, and definitely also for the biochemicals and biomaterials. So merging the insights from the scenarios I've briefly pointed out to the potentials and also to to what could be optimal use. There is a bandwidth for Europe, so it could stay low where we get stuck kind of on that current 7 exajoules, but we may see shifts, of course, in the current use to future use still. But at the moment, we start to push that development of sustainable biomass resource base. We may be looking at a very sizable share of so maybe 20-25 exajoules in that future current European energy system, and also delivering a very large part of the mitigation that is shown here. Because if you add up the high biomass scenario mitigation contribution in advanced fuels, and also in the biochemicals where the main markets is, that is still also shares for biogas, etc. In those calculations, we are looking at about 1/3 of the total greenhouse gas emissions of the EU that could be mitigated by the use of biomass, so including everything, also the emissions of the biomass value chains. If we look at the potential for BECCS on top of that, and many of these conversion options offer those low-cost CO2 capture options, that could add up another 700 megaton, looking at a reasonable share of the carbon flows. And then we're looking at close to half the total EU greenhouse gas emissions, looking at what we could achieve with increasing carbon stocks. That is a one-time possibility, but let's look at 30 years that we're able to do it. The key target here, that could also contribute to 10 to 15 megaton per year for that time period. And those carbon stocks should then stay in place. So that is in total a massive potential with EU biomass on EU land in the EU energy system. So concluding on this, that I dare to say very, very strongly that sustainable biomass resources are not fiction and can be made available while achieving key synergies with sustainable agriculture, forest management, and restoration of degraded lands. This links very much to the points David has also made. The sustainable European biomass potentials can cover about 1/3 of the primary energy supply of the continent, which is comparable to the role of mineral oil today. If we look at the economic impact of that, that could improve the trade balance of the EU tremendously. The imports of fossil fuels today in the EU pre-COVID is 400 billion euros every year. And biomass could absorb a large part of that. That is a structural improvement of our economic situation. That money can then end up in the forest areas, in the rural regions, in the marginal regions of Europe. And that is a major opportunity to link our energy expenditures, not to oil import, but to our rural regions in Europe. That is a major opportunity for economic recovery. And that's why the Common Agricultural Policy and the Green Deal meet here. And the bio-based economy is right in the middle. These advanced technologies, the BECCS, but also the combinations with the green electricity and the green hydrogen offer major pathways to supply these high quality fuels for our future transport system, the aviation, the shipping, the heavy freight transport, next to the electric vehicles. That's not a conflict, but a fine portfolio. And also in future industry. And that is one of the very difficult puzzles we have to solve. And that's why these negative emissions can be realized. And we know we need them to meet the target, not only towards 2050, but also beyond to compensate for the overshoot. That makes also biomass and BECCS one of these fundamental parts of our future energy system. The bio-based economy in Europe with European biomass resources can also just tackle about 1/3 of the required mitigation effort, combining the avoided fossil fuels, the negative emissions, and the benefits for the carbon stocks. That is a massive nexus opportunity, as you can call it, for the EU Green Deal. It links these areas, and it is also a major opportunity for economic recovery after the COVID-19 crisis. I hope I've made the point that the people in this field, in this gathered also in this biomass conference, have a major responsibility also in this sense, because I think we are among friends discussing this in this arena. But there is many forces that are against biomass. Also in the IPCC reports, you see a lot of negative literature included. It's perfect to be critical. Scientifically, that is fully correct. But there is a lot of answers to that. And I hope my presentation outlined where these answers are. And we need more science, more research, more demonstrations pointing out how this can be done. Because we cannot lose the biomass option. I think that's very, very clear how important it is to meet the targets that we have to meet and not lose this opportunity. So, dear scientists, dear researchers, do your best to make clear to the world how this can be done in all the different settings we're looking at. That was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. This was really an excellent presentation. Thank you for the very comprehensive overview of the potential contribution of biomass to the bio-based economy. Now it's time for question and answers. We have together with us Heinz Rosenbrink, former European Commission Joint Research Center. He's the facilitator, moderator for the question and answers for this morning. And we had some questions. Please, Heinz, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicola. This is a relatively easy task. There were not too many questions simply because the presentations were so excellent. There were two groups. One was really to Andre, and that's regarding the bioenergy carbon capture and storage. And that's a question which comes from Japan, and asking whether how much of biomass supply would be needed to get carbon capture storage into the 1.5 degree scenario. So Andre, can you just directly reply to it?
Okay, that's a very nice quantitative question, and I my integrated assessment model open for that. What I can say is that if we look at scenarios that realize these negative emissions on a sizable scale, you look on a global scale, you're looking at a biomass contribution that is around 20-25% of the global primary energy demand in the future. So easily about 200 exajoules. That ratio is quite similar to what I've shown for the European portfolio, so to say, and the role of biomass in the total mitigation strategy. And then looking at what share of biomass is linked to the CCS options, you're talking overall about a majority share. So about 2/3 or so of the conversion for advanced fuels for chemicals allows for these clever combinations with CO2 removal. But of course, not all the carbon in the biomass will be captured, because a large part of the carbon is still in the product, in the fuel, and in the feedstock. So this ratio is generally about 1/3 to half. If we have those contributions of net CO2 removal, so that is in total in the chain a net CO2 vacuum cleaner, that can over time lead to these cumulative negative emissions that can compensate for the overshoot. I hope that is a reasonable answer.
Yeah, okay, sure. Thank you, Andre. We go only to another second question, which was addressed to David. It's about how much biofuel we actually need for decarbonizing transport when we have all these electric vehicles already coming up. So what's your opinion on this?
Thank you, Heinz. Well, actually, if we look at many of the scenarios that have been developed in the recent year, and I particularly refer to IEA as to this scenario, it is clearly indicated how there is a complementarity between advanced biofuel use and electrical renewable-based electrical transport. So at 2050, we expect that we really need both. As André said, which I'm 100% in agreement what he has shown. There are issues with the infrastructure and the grid balancing and all these things that we'll need to address. I mean, it's doable. It's just a matter of time. It cannot be done in 1 year, these kind of things. But I absolutely see that we need both to achieve. And if I may just add a small thing to what André said, as I said, I fully agree. Our work is mostly focused on agriculture and on biochar and compost. And in that respect, complementary to what André said, I see a huge potential also to bring in this carbon back to the soil through these systems that are already framed by IPCC. So it's another huge potential to have agriculture to contribute to carbon sequestration, but also to recover the land. And just my final comment, I think we should reconsider the common agricultural policy to stimulate those interventions that are more, how can I say, similar to CAPEX than OPEX intervention. I mean, if I work on the land, whatever I do, it's a long-term action. So it should be seen as something that is done 1 year for the benefit of many decades, at least, following. And therefore, the type of intervention and support should be designed in that way, which, as far as I know, is not yet in CAP.
So thank you very much, David. Now, I'm very an interesting question which comes up now, and I'm really asking Andre or David, whoever wants to reply, to be very, very short, because it says basically the public debate on biofuels has basically harmed the potential of biomass for the bioeconomy. So what do you think is now different? So how do we get the public accepting this plan?
Yeah, if you like me to answer, yeah, that is absolutely true observation. And yeah, to my frustration, I think the public opinion is strongly influenced by framing and not by scientific fact. And that is a tragedy. We have seen, and that is a classic problem for biomass. Biomass, bio-based economy, seen debated from very specific perspectives. People concerned mainly about biodiversity or mainly about ecological agriculture. So these partial visions. And I understand that, but at the moment you look at things holistically, what both David and I have tried to make clear, we have to address all these problems at the same time under the pressure of climate change. Then you cannot allow yourself to solve single problems one by one. We have to come with integral strategies. And when you start to do that, you see that the synergies between all these different priorities are there. And we have only 3 decades to do the job, but it is about meeting the targets that we have to meet. Now, in convincing the public opinion, I think the key is show how. Like more studies, we need it, we need the science, but we especially need to show how, that people can see this is what it means to combine sustainable agriculture with sustainable biomass. This is what it means when you manage a forest well for the different purposes that we have. This is how you achieve negative emissions at a low cost. So let's by all means continue with our industrial partners to show how to do this.
Thank you, Andre. I think it was such a nice conclusion of this morning session. I hand over to Nicola now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Heinz. It's time to move on. It's unfortunate that we don't have much time to discuss such interesting and important aspects. Now it is time, however, to pass the floor to the General Chair of this conference, Philippe Mauguin, who is also the President of IRAE, the National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and Environment, to deliver his welcome address.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I will not have the pleasure of welcoming you to Marseille this year as planned. I regret this, but the COVID-19 crisis is forcing us to change our ways of interacting. It's an entirely virtual seminar which is proposed to you. I am sure this new format will meet your expectations and will be rich in debate. The COVID-19 crisis is a cruel reminder that we cannot destroy ecosystems with impunity without disrupting human and ecosystem health, reinforcing the need for a comprehensive approach through the concept of planetary health. Although the use of biomass, because of its renewable nature, has strong benefits for achieving Europe's climate objectives and those of the New Green Deal, its development must not be carried out in an anarchic manner. In this context, the main issues for the bioeconomy are the sustainable production and efficient conversion of primary biomass and the mobilization of residual biomass, including waste, without generating negative impacts on the environment and society. Indeed, a large number of trade-offs exist, such as conflicts over land use in relation to food and the preservation of natural ecosystems. over the intensification of agriculture or forestry production, leading to soil degradation and loss of biodiversity, and over greenhouse gas emissions from production to final processing. I therefore hope that the issue of the sustainability of the bioeconomy will be at the heart of your debates during this Congress. I wish you will propose solutions to move towards a carbon neutral economy in line with the expectation of a society that is rapidly becoming aware of the planet's limits. I wish you an excellent Congress, full of hopeful proposals for a more responsible society in the face of climate change, which requires rapid action on both mitigation and adaptation. I hope to meet you again in Marseille in April 2021 to continue the debates. Take care of yourself and the planet.
With this one, we arrive at the end of the first session of this conference, the scientific session. And I would like to thank to the audience for being here with us. I would like to thank to the keynote speakers for their excellent presentations. And I will like to pass the floor to Heinz Ossenbrink, who will introduce you the next sessions of this morning.
So thank you very much, Nicola. Just very briefly, as you have seen already in the scientific opening, we have some quite interesting facts to discuss, which fit under the motto of this conference, Bioeconomy's Role in the Post-Pandemic Economic Recovery. It's a wide field, and so we decided to make two panel debates instead of one, where we can focus a little bit on the bioeconomy part and on the bioenergy part. So the first one will be more on the general impact an increasing bioeconomy can have to increase our European resilience. I think was very well explained already in the morning how important this is, and what this new economic sector, if it's getting strong, really can help us in creating new jobs and overcome this crisis. So this is the overall overarching idea about the first part of the debate, and later I will say something more on the energy part. I would like to call Giovanni De Santi to introduce the panel debate and the panelists then. Giovanni, it's your floor. Many thanks.
Good morning, Heinz. Good morning, everybody. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you.
Can you see me? So can I start?
Giovanni, go ahead. You are visible and hearable.
Ah, very good. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Heinz. So first of all, good morning to the planetary audience that I guess is in front of me virtually. So I'm quite emotional having been asked again to be the chair of this first edition via web of the European Biomass Conference. Is a very new modern way to accommodate the problems that we do have nowadays, but it's also possibly a new way for the future, no? To accompany the physical meeting with something more modern, which allow also to expand the audience to also the people that are interested, but they cannot move physically to the place and to be physically present. So welcome this new idea to have this virtual EUBCE, and again, could be the start of a new era. On the other side, I think it's also important, this conference, because we already reflected many times last year about how to enlarge the portfolio of this conference, which was traditionally focused on biomass and bioenergy, and to expand to the bioeconomy, simply because bioeconomy is now becoming the real engine. In Europe, at least one of the key engines for the recovery process, is encompasses many sectors. Of course, the biomass and bioenergy remain if you like, the main focus of this conference, but not the sole one. So there will be others, and I think it's important now to start thinking how the biodiversity, how the forest, how the blue economy, there will be also important for the future recovery in Europe. So welcome also this new title, especially after the COVID. I think that we need to understand two things. First of all, the forecasts, as you know, for the EU economy are not very good. We already saw and we already expect a GDP to fall by 8%, more or less 80% in the EU. So this gives a very clear challenge ahead. But on the other side, we also saw that finally this situation, this pandemic situation, now made possibly EU more compact to understand that we need to react together. And this is why the President put forward and the European Union put forward the Next Generation EU, which is worth 750 billion of euro. Now with a reinforced multi-annual program, so the MFF, you know, so there is a kind of very serious and very powerful boost for whatever Europe can do to recover. So we have, from one side, a very clear challenge ahead. From the other side, however, we have a very clear intention to use all the possible synergies, all the possible methodologies to make Europe stronger and more resilient. Now, in this context, bioeconomy is one of the few opportunities that Europe has. As you know, Europe does not have a silver bullet to solve all the problems, but we do have our intelligence, we do have our environment, we have our own indigenous sources. So the bioeconomy will be considered, and is considered, one of the central pillars of the Green Deal. So you know the Green Deal, among the 6 priorities of the Commission, is by far the most possibly imminent one, very important, at the center of the program of the European Commission for the next years. And what does it mean, Green Deal? The Green Deal means to boost the recovery, to boost industrial prosperity, to boost revenues, however, in the full respect of the environment. However, preserving the biodiversity, preserving our environment, so to make everything we will do in the future sustainable. Sustainable with the 360 degrees approach, not just for profit, not just for one aspect, but including all the possible social, environment, and economic aspects. So this is why bioeconomy is now at the center of the European Commission policy, and in particular for Green Deal, and not only for Green Deal. Because again, if we do use properly our indigenous sources and we transform into something important and something very much rewarded also from economic point of view, and so job creation, unemployment, fighting, and whatever, I think we will make also Europe more resilient, because the COVID clearly showed that Europe has to be stronger per se. So the more we will use our own brain, our own resources, the better it will be, in full coordination with the other continents, because it's clear that there will not be any recovery, any prosperity, sustainable prosperity, if we will not be in full agreement with the other continents. This is why collaboration, especially with USA and the other continents, are very central in our future policy. So just to come to this conference, we thought that it was the right moment now, and I will introduce you now in a few moments, the distinguished panelists that will share with me how they do see the future, how do they see the role that the bioeconomy can play in the future of Europe and worldwide, you know, because again, bioeconomy is now a fact. We do have bioeconomy action plan. The member states will also have to implement their own action plan, whereby the GFC, where I am director. So maybe I did not introduce myself, I'm sorry. I am the director at the European Commission of the Sustainable Resources Directorate, so in charge for whatever is considered Green Deal, in particular for what concerns bioeconomy, agriculture, environment, health observation, so what is within the Green Deal, farm to fork, and whatsoever. So again, I am very much involved in present discussion within the Commission and the member states, how, again, to couple, again, the restoration of our competitiveness, of our recovery process, however, with the preservation and defend and even improvement of the ecosystem. This is the difficult challenge. how can we get better and sustainable profit of our resources, with at the same moment an important continuous improvement of our social and economic situation. So this is exactly what I want to discuss now with my loved panelists, because again, I think this is in the end the key question. What do you expect? How can we make a sustainable future via difficult situation, starting from a difficult situation, however, getting profit from, as I said before, our internal indigenous sources, our brain, and definitely our convincing position that Europe can even export this position, this kind of determined solution to the rest of the world. So I think that this is why I want now to have different points of view, and then we can come back again and again to the different points I just mentioned, so that are central for the European Commission in the policy debate, how again to recover via the Green Deal, via a more resilient and sustainable solution. Sustainable, again, 360 degrees. So we need to consider the life cycle analysis, we have to consider the environmental footprint, so we need to consider all different aspects. So I want to be short because I think there will be many possible questions and also from the audience. So we'll go now through a very first series of statements from the different panelists. Then I will go through a kind of initial questions to each of these panelists, and then we will open the debate to the audience. So whoever wants to raise some question, it will be very well welcome, and I'll try to divert the questions to the proper speaker. So the panelists, let me just introduce to you the panelists. So we will have first an introductory speech from Maria da Gracia Carvalho, that you know is a member of the European Parliament. Then we will have Arnaud Leroy, is the president of ADIM in France. Monique Axelos, she's scientific director for food and bioeconomy at the INRAE. Then we have Paolo Frank, he is head of the Renewable Energy Division at the International Energy Agency, again in Paris. And then Jennifer Ulgrim, she is the CEO of the Lanza Technology, or Lanza Tech, which is again a very important industry dealing with the CO2 recirculation, and so the activity linked to the introduction of new technology, green technology, and whatsoever. So before going one by one, again, I would like to invite that, therefore, Maria da Gracia, you know that she's very important because she is not only full professor at Technical University in Lisbon, exactly on energy and climate change, but she has had in the past so important high-level political position, from being herself the Minister for Science and Higher Education in Portugal, and since many years now she's member of the European Parliament. So she can give us a kind of very large, comprehensive and integrated view how she does see the situation, how she does see the role of the bioeconomy. So I would like to introduce now first the discussion and the speech from Maria. Thank you, Maria.
First of all, thank you very much for your invitation. I cannot be part of your discussions live, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say a few words in this conference that I hold dear. Last year, it was my honor to host this conference, the EUBCE 2019 in Lisbon. It was a memorable event with over 1,500 delegates from 70 different countries. 2020 is the year where everything changed, and we'll never forget. These are challenging times for our economies and for our society, but there are some signs of hope. The Union and the Member States are struggling to find a balance for the proper relaunch and they have agreed on a vision for the future generations. The Green Deal represents this new vision for the European growth. For the biomass sector, times were exciting before the crisis, and I'm convinced that it continues to be so in the future. The biomass sector plays an important role in helping Europe and the world to address the climate issue while preserving the socioeconomic well-being of the population. Circular economy and sector coupling will be very important strategies that could lead to major opportunities in the European biomass sector. Technology still needs progress and advancements to solve problems of some sectors with more difficulties to decarbonize. To achieve the ambitious goal of deep decarbonization, bioenergy is tremendously promising. This year, the EUBCE for the first time is integrating bioeconomy in its conference. This is an important landmark in the conference series. The new European vision for greening and resilience could be an important turning point for the biomass sector and the bioeconomy, which are in a privileged position to be one of the main drivers of the change that Europe needs to do. I regret not to be able to follow the conference as I did last year, but you can count on me and on my support for your work in future editions of the conference. I wish you fruitful discussion, trying to make this huge sector a strategic opportunity for Europe's recovery. And a final word to thank Angela Grassi for her enthusiasm and persistence. Without Angela, this conference would not exist. I wish all the best, and I hope to be able to meet Angela and all of you. Doesn't matter where, but to meet in person. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I think that we all support what you said in many fronts, on many fronts. First of all, to thank Angela and all the organizers because their dedication, they made year by year this conference becoming the conference on biomass, on bioenergy. Now, I'm sure that in a few years' time, it will be the conference on bioeconomy. No? And second, also because, as you said, again, the key role of the bioeconomy in the new context, political context, and the Green Deal in particular, is absolutely central for the Europe destiny. So thank you again, Maria, for giving us, as usual, your support and also your wish to see us soon physically again. Yeah, I think it's very welcome by everybody. So if you do hear me, and I can then continue now, I think it's time to start the lively discussion among the real panelists. No? And I would like, therefore, to invite one after the other, the panelists, to give just a 3 minutes introduction, no? Setting the scene from their perspective. And I would like, therefore, to start with Arnaud Leroy. Again, Arnaud Leroy, again, is a good continuation from Maria because he's such a high level of personality. He is now president of ADIM, and you know ADIM is the French Environment and Energy Management Agency. But he had also, in his past experience, participated to the European Parliament, to the French Parliament. So I think that he can put together and make a synthesis of both scientific, technical responsibility and expertise, also with the political view. So I'm very much interested to listen to Arnaud as the very first speaker and to make, again, a 3-4 minutes statement to introduce the discussion. Thank you, Arnaud.
Hello, good morning to all. Just a few words to be sharp and quick. First, in ADEM, we believe as well strongly in the potential of biomass. So to give you a few figures, roughly per year, we invest 120 million euro in different studies, innovation, and it's something quite big. And we've got a lot of partnership as well in biomass with the local authorities, because one of the positive aspects of biomass is the fact that it's local. So you can build a real consensus, you can build short distance solution in terms of energy, for example. And it brings me as well a few questions regarding the way people are dealing with acceptability issues. You know, like people are nowadays more and more concerned about the fact that you are using and cutting forests. So we see the stuff growing in France. So it could be interesting to hear views about this. So it's clearly a political issue. Even if you manage to explain, you've got people who invest in a house, in a farm or somewhere where you've got a nice landscape with forest. And when you start to, let's say, harvest the forest, you start to have problems in terms of acceptability, as we say in a good French. I don't know the English version of it, but it's one of the questions we are facing more and more regarding the use of biomass in energy. Second, we didn't mention it this morning. We are all focused on the post-COVID solution, saying that biomass is one way and it could be used. We should really accelerate in this aspect, and we fully agree, we fully support. There is one key element that I would like to address as well, is the adaptation to climate change. We need to really accelerate on these aspects, and there biomass and bioeconomy has a key role to play. I saw in the questions, people questioning about the use of algae and everything. So we have to look at all the potentiality, all the options, solutions. That's what we are doing in the agency. And I would like to really conclude on this aspect of adaptation to climate change. We need to find solutions to reboost and restart our economy. But I think we need as well to look at carefully as well the money we need to invest in terms of adaptation, the type of trees and the type of solutions we could really promote from the bioeconomy and biomass to help us in adaptation to climate change. It's something that really have to look for and invest in this side. That's what we are trying to do as well with the ADEM, with some other like Jean-Louis Ball, who will take the floor later on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you very much. I think that we will come back to the points you mentioned before, because again, the proper management of forest, and in particular the wood harvesting, is becoming a crucial issue for the sustainable acceptability of bioeconomy, let's say, of biomass flow. This is one of the key points that maybe I will come back again with a question to you immediately afterwards. And adaptation is another key issue. I agree exactly, because adaptation is something which was not at the same level of mitigation so far, because it's now becoming a crucial point, because it needs long-lasting, very expensive decisions that not all the member states are keen to do. So I think the adaptation is becoming now a central issue, especially for the agriculture and forest. In the past, we thought that just anthropogenic sources were the source of where we had to reduce the CO2, but now it's clear that the more we go to reduce the anthropogenic, the more we need also to consider the agriculture and forest. So thank you for the time being. I would like to shift immediately to Monique Axelos. She's, as I said before, Scientific Director for Food and Bioeconomy, so it's very pertinent in the INRAE. INRAE is, as you know, the National Research Institute in France for Agriculture and Environment, newly constituted since about 2 years. And I think that she's the best possible speaker now to understand how bioeconomy, which again couple all the sources from agriculture, from different sectors, however, preserving the environment should be considered in the future. So Monique, the floor is yours for your initial statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santi. Thank you very much for the invitation, and good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to apologize for the absence of Philippe Mauguin, CEO of INRA, in this debate. I don't know if I can share my screen because I have just one slide to show. Okay. Is it okay for you?
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
Okay. So I just some word on INRA. I'm sure that you know, but INRA is one of the world's leading research institute in the field of agriculture, food, and the environment. And we are also driving force in the European research, coordinating and participating in multiple European projects, and of course, very engaged to meet the challenge of the Green Deal. In the domain of bioeconomy, we have just published our vision and strategy, and I think INRA research wants really to contribute to the development of a sustainable and circular bioeconomy, firmly rooted in the territories, because we believe that this bioeconomy could support a climate neutral economy, could restore the natural resources, biodiversity, and ecosystem services, help the economic development of these territories, and adapt to the consequence of climate change. As you can see on the slide, to implement this vision, our strategy organized around 4 main areas of research we consider as major one. The first one is to increase our knowledge about agroecological system to sustainably intensify the production of biomass, which is the main point. We need biomass, but you need to have a sustainable production of this biomass. The second one is to develop the optimal use and value maximization of available bioresources by cascading and multiple added value products. This is efficiency of the biomass production. The third one is to explore how to close the cycle of all nutrients, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, for example, considering reutilization and recycling. This is the circularity of bioeconomy. And the last one is to anticipate, organize, and manage fluxes, trade, and markets in the diverse territories under constraint. And coupled with these 4 research areas, we have 2 transversal actions, which seems very important, is exploiting digitalization for bioeconomy research trajectory, and is to developing scenarios and predictive model, allowing a comprehensive approach by taking into account the necessary link between bioeconomy, but also the links with water, energy, cultural diversity, because it's major impact, and the global health. Thank you.
So again, thank you very much, Monique, because you make even more explicit than me what it means to have a very clear understanding of the sustainability of bioeconomy, which means to consider the entire life cycle. So you need to go from the sources, so how you produce sustainable biomass sources, but how you also get use of the possible also the secondary products, how even to recycle, including waste. So in the end, it should be from the very start to the very end, a kind of sustainable solution. So I think that we will come back again this, because this is a key issue for the European Commission, how to guarantee that, again, whenever we do put on the market something, we have not ignored some aspect, including social aspects. So just again, thank you, Monique, and I'll come back to you very soon. Now let me finish the first 3. The third panel will close the 3 panels from Europe. And again, I would like then to invite Paolo Frank, is very well known. Apart from being a friend of this conference, Paulo is a very well-known expert in the renewable energy sector because he's head again of the renewable energy division of the International Energy Agency. So I think that I would like again to complete this first panorama from the European perspective with Paulo, and then to pass to the more international part with Jennifer. So Paulo, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Giovanni, and I hope you can hear me correctly. Now,
yes.
At the IEA, we very often say it's not energy the issue. The issue are emissions. And obviously, this is true for fossil fuels, that's obvious, but it's also true for bio. And what matters here is the carbon efficiency. So how efficient the whole carbon is used over the life cycle of the product or products. And it's obvious that the bioeconomy, with a number of options, extending lifetimes, having more end-of-life options, having cascading options that where waste becomes a resource, producing multiple products from a biorefinery concepts to go with the reuse and recycling of carbon, and then ultimately also the BECCS that Andre mentioned here. This is phenomenally important to increase the efficiency of carbon and over the whole life cycle. And I would also add the second point. The driver is not just environmental, it is also economic. The typical issue of bioenergy is the lack of value or let's say lack of remuneration of co-products very often. When we look at bioenergy from an energy point perspective and the competitiveness with other options, we are always stuck with the same problem of this lack of valuation. Now, the biorefinery concept that produces multiple products from a certain feedstock or platforms helps a lot of that. And indeed, this is also the principle of the conventional fossil fuel refineries. They are focused on a main energy fuel, but then they do high value, very high value, specialty chemicals, which can make indeed the profitability. Now, let me add two more aspects where I can bring the international context. The IEA Secretariat as such is not very active in the bioeconomy per se, but our IEA Bioenergy Technology Collaboration Program has a lot of activities for a long time, and I'm sure Jim Spaeth will add something and will correct me if I say something wrong. Task 42 on biorefining in a future bioeconomy has a number of activities, and I would like to mention a few points. First is a definition of what is the biorefining, which is an important thing because, of course, there are different approaches, different understandings. Second, the concept of biocascading, which should adopt the principle that you do everything else before, and then at the end you do the energy recovery, because once it's burned, the CO2 is out. And of course, the link also with other streams like green hydrogen, which can then lead to biochemicals. I wish to mention two recent reports of the task. One is Bio-Based Chemicals 2020 update that I all invite you to read. And the other thing which I found very interesting is these fact sheets of different biorefinery platforms. The platforms are a key point because they are a key intermediate feedstock for multiple products, and having this very short fact sheet which look at the material cycle, at the economic value, at the emissions over the life cycle, I find extremely important. Let me conclude with two more points. The IEA is also the facilitator of the BioFuture platform, which has as an objective, which is a 20-country initiative chaired by Brazil, but co-chairs Canada, India, the Netherlands, the UK, and the US, and the IEA is the facilitator, and which has the objective of upscaling the sustainable bioeconomy. In December 28, there was a first report of creating the BioFuture, which has a kind of picture of the status of advanced biofuels and bioproducts. We are working now on the policy blueprint. What kind of policy best practices can scale up the economy? And the last point, right now, the BioFuture platform is discussing 5 core BioFuture principles for post-COVID recovery and acceleration, which are basically: do not backtrack, do not leave the ambitions, consider short-term economic support for producers who are suffering, reassess the taxation regimes and the fossil fuel subsidies, build back better with some conditions on the transport and chemical sector, and of course, reward sustainability of the life cycle in the remuneration schemes, like it happens in California or in Brazil. I'll stop it here for the sake of time, but of course, welcome any questions. And I'm sure Jennifer will say now the real examples, not like just myself. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paolo. As usual, in a few seconds, you bombarded us with so many stimulating points that are very much correct. Because again, when you simply extend what also Monique mentioned before, so how it's important to consider the whole chain, from the very source to the very end, including bioenergy and biorefinery and the biocascading. So I think this is very clear. If we want to develop a profitable, sustainable chain for introducing bioeconomy, we need to consider all these aspects, and we will come back to you definitely. But now, before we start the lively debate, I would like, of course, to hand over to Jennifer. Jennifer Olgrim, she's the CEO of LanzaTech, which is again a carbon recycling company in US, and she's therefore very much interested in innovation, research and innovation, biotechnology, how also to include and to convert even better and better waste and residues. Because as you know, the bioenergy from the second, if not the third generation of biomass is considered the only, in Europe at least, is the only future of the biomass and the bioenergy. So Jennifer, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Dr. De Santi. I will share just a few slides, both describing the technology that we have developed, but more importantly, our views on how to accelerate creating a truly impactful bioeconomy. As many of you know, what we do at LanzaTech is we convert waste gas emissions through gas fermentation to ethanol. We have learned how to take that ethanol, working with Pacific Northwest National Lab in the US, to jet fuel. And of course, you can take ethanol to ethylene and make packaging materials and other products. The power of synthetic biology, though, comes into play in our ability, and that of many others, to selectively produce chemicals. The ability to take these same gases and make acetone directly from these feeds is quite important, for example. In terms of feedstock, one can also gasify solids as well as convert CO2 directly via electrolysis. I want to stop for a second and just comment that this is truly the power of the biology. If you stop and think about it, we must think differently if we're going to create a different future. Today, refineries process on the order of 200 to 300,000 barrels a day. Biology will not be converting solids at that scale, but biology, because it is so selective, can create a very different bioeconomy where distributed production and conversion of carbon to a selected product can be done on a small scale. This is not science fiction. We have built a commercial plant in China, where we've produced more than 50 million liters of ethanol from waste steel mill gases. And one of the things we're trying to do now is scale further in Europe and in other places, but by leveraging more local feedstocks. We have a European project called Steelanol with ArcelorMittal, where we will be converting a very different steel mill gas to ethanol. If you talk about commercializing process technologies, I think one of the most important things to remember is that scaling very big pieces of metal, as I call them, takes time. It's not just a case of proving out the technology, but also raising the capital that's required to go from a laboratory to a pilot and then to a commercial plant. But what I would point out is that it's also extremely important to think about the diffusion of the technology. A technology does not have impact after one commercial deployment. You need to scale, and scaling new technologies is normally exponential process. We see that with solar. It's taken over 40 years to get solar to the point where it's doubling quickly, and we're starting to see implementation globally. Once you start diffusion, you start to reduce the price of deployment and increase the efficiency. So getting to the fusion of a new technology is quite important. As you and other speakers have illustrated earlier today, the reality is that magical thinking is not going to get us to net zero by 2050. Technology deployment is a very, very difficult process, and it takes a tremendous amount of time. So if I may offer a few thoughts about how to accelerate scale up, technology neutral solutions and positions enable all technologies a seat at the table. The second thing that I think is extremely important is to have a forward view, not a backwards view when we're looking at deployment. When Tesla first introduced electric vehicles, one of the concerns was that the grid was mostly carbon, coal-based. And yet they went ahead and commercialized the technology, improved the efficiency at the same time as the grid was greening. I would also argue that greening the grid is going to really enable biotechnology to flourish, because we can use electrons rather than just sunlight directly like we grow biomass. So I would urge you to please consider forward views in policies and definitions, because without that, we could block new disruptive technologies. And we really don't have time. 2050, when you're talking about large technology deployment, is just around the corner. Thank you.
Giovanni, you're muted.
Sorry. Jennifer, thanks a lot. I really love your short speech, because as usual, the industrialists, they put immediately the finger on the real problem. In Europe, as you know, we are possibly the champ for many ideas, for research, now in the various universities. We are not that good in innovation. We are not that good in crossing and going across the Death Valley in between the ideas and the market scale. So we are not able to bring good ideas at the market level in an efficient and effective way. So I think that what you said is open another aspect, which the Commission is trying now to go across with the new multi-annual program, which will start to improve and to support all the innovations in Europe, and to find a way, as you said, also ethanol from gas, from methane. You know, I think that this is one of the possible technology, but we need to scale up to a real industrial level. Okay, so to make it short, I think that we have different views, and however, coming to very common points that do show how much bioeconomy will be at the center in the future, the center of a sustainable, resilient, and let's say social correct future, not only in Europe, but of course we are mostly living in Europe, so we do care about our old continent in the context, of course, of the world attempt. So let me now go through a series of questions before we open the debate to the audience. Let me start again from Arnaud, because you mentioned very clearly agriculture, you mentioned forestry, how you need to manage correctly, you know, and this is a very important issue for the bioeconomy, because you know that whenever you touch bioeconomy and whenever you go to the forest agriculture, as you said, if it is not properly managed, we will have immediately problems. As you said, the wood harvest, if it is not properly managed, could risk to be increased, and therefore we need to care about how the bio strategy will avoid this. we do to consider the biodiversity. This is, as you know, that the biodiversity communication and strategy has been now approved. So these are all all aspects that should be considered in a more diversified agriculture, which is possibly a target for the new common agriculture policy. So how do you see yourself the challenge for a more modern agriculture and forestry policy, to the respect of of course, to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, but also to provide this kind of sustainable future for the bioeconomy? This is a central problem in Europe. Thank you, Arnaud.
Thanks a lot, Giovanni. I think it was mentioned earlier on, the issue we've got already with windmills, sometimes green gas as well. The way we can really put a big priority on biomass for me and is first to build on acceptability. So find some tools maybe to compensate, I don't know, to put money in this. Second, it's really to explain that we need to, between brackets, harvest a forest to ensure the trees could survive. And it means that immediately you need to replant and without any delay or whatever. So something like really the fields is being harvested and being replanted with clear explanation, a big work on pedagogical aspects. So maybe that you change the trees to ensure that they will survive to climate change. So in a sense of adaptation, I think it could be really interesting. And second, it's especially true for agriculture. I mean, the COVID situation, I don't know how it went in the other part of Europe, but at least in France, we saw a lot of people looking for food from their surroundings. So all this bioeconomy / agricultural located in surroundings of big metropolitan areas or medium-sized cities has a clear role to play as well in the promotion and in the really the growing of bioeconomy in our European economy. So this is really something really interesting. And second, bioeconomy is, to me, also related to green gas. You know, we will have wastes from the agriculture, waste from the consumption of fruit, vegetables, and whatever within the citizens. So it means really big as well amounts of waste that you could use to produce energy also. So it's something that needs to be explained, built as well, and we have to admit that it will be a bit more expensive than it is currently with the natural gas. So all these elements are related to bioeconomy. Green gas could be also used in industry. So where we are looking for solutions to decarbonize industry, we may have hydrogen in a near future, but still it may be not sufficient. So it could be a way as well to promote and explain the role of bioeconomy in its large definition.
Okay, I think that you are very optimistic, and I do agree with you. And I don't know whether somebody else wants to add, because, for example, Monique, you are from INRAE, so say that nobody better than you can explain to me, because I'm from European Commission. Of course, I need to know what the different member states think. Do you really think that the combination of the new modern agricultural policies, so the new CAP, will encompass also the environmental constraints and in particular biodiversity? So is it possible to have a profitable, sustainable agriculture, however, with the protection of the environment, of the biodiversity, soil quality, water quality, reducing greenhouse gas emission? This is a very key issue for us in the Commission to understand how we can intersecate environment and make it sustainably accompanying also the agriculture. So Monique, based also on what Arnaud said, do you think we are moving in the right direction to develop this new CAP together with the biodiversity, together with the soil protection? Because as soon as possible, we will have also European Soil Observatory. What do you think?
Yes, thank you, Giovanni. I think that for the first time, the CAP has really taken into account the question of sustainability of the production, and not only the production, but the sustainability of all the chain from biomass production to food and to materials also. And for example, diversification in agriculture and forestry is very important. But by diversification, you have different level of diversification. You need, in fact, to have an idea of we need to link the different scale of this diversification. So I think that for the European Commission, you need to encourage to understand what's happened in the field, what has happened in the landscape, and by diversification at this different scale, you can reduce directly gas emission, but greenhouse emission. But you can, because of course you increase carbon capture, but you can also reduce the use of pesticide and fertilizer, which indirectly reduce GHG, because you, for example, you by this agroecological vision of production, it's really an opportunity to the decarbonation of agriculture, and also the reducing the mineral fertilization of agriculture. And concerning biodiversity, for example, it's you need to maintain biodiversity, and this is a real challenge. And for example, you are in a biodiversity strategy, you encourage a win-win solution. But this for research is really very stimulating to have this win-win solution. And but I think for this we need to have demonstrator, and for them, and what we need is long-term demonstrator, and this will be also very important to assess really the impact of CAP policy, for example, on biodiversity for the long term. And this, I think, it's very important also. And research try to develop this demonstrator in parallel with different policy. I think we need more metrics.
Thank you, Monique. I don't know whether somebody else wants to add something. For me, what I do like very much is that we open now very, very correctly the debate to the bio. Bio does not mean a priori everything is fine, everything is perfect. We do need to consider, and this was very clearly said by Paolo, whenever we do consider the bio economy, we need to have a very fair attempt to understand from the very beginning to the very end what are the consequences. We all remember the biofuel when they were introduced. We thought to have found the panacea of all problems for transport. And then we realized that if you do consider properly the direct and indirect effects of biofuel, you may end up in a worse situation with respect to the fossil fuel. So I think that now it's very clear. This was for the very first generation, but if you now consider the second generation not competing with food and feed industry, the situation is totally different. But still, we need to have a very 360-degree approach. You mentioned, Monique, for example, the less use of pesticides, so the more use of natural fertilizers. But again, this being also to possible reduce yields of the agriculture. So in theory, more areas devoted to agriculture, so the land use change, and again, land use change means climate change. So it's so complex that, again, I think that one of the key issues now, and I come to you now, Paul, again, because I think you can help me. It's so complex now to see how the future bio production, wherever it does come from, energy or for transport or for simply other application of the bio-based industry, I think it's so important to have this kind of very clear depth analysis from the very beginning, so throughout the life cycle analysis. Otherwise, we risk that we do again make the same mistake we did. We are now, for example, just to give you the last example, we are now examining the bioplastic. Now, bioplastic is not per se the solution. It, of course, is a very important step ahead that we want to continue, but to make the bioplastic acceptable, we need to consider also there are some cons and not just the pro. So this is a mantra that we are keep on saying to all sectors. We need to have a fair, scientifically based approach. And this is what you mentioned before. So maybe you can come back on this point from your perspective. So how we can develop more and more the bioenergy in the context of sustainable bioeconomy. With different possibility, biofuel, algae, green hydrogen, whatever.
No, I don't think I want to get into the technological routes, which are very, very many. I would like to stress two things. First, before working at the IA, I worked in life cycle assessment for 15 years. Now, I want to be a little provocative here, but with LCA, if the rules are not transparent and are fixed by an independent body, it is very easy to demonstrate everything and the contrary of everything. It is simply very simple to change the scope, the boundaries, the assumptions, and then everything becomes very messy. So what I would like to stress here is the importance of the institutional aspect and of the certification and the verification of what is done in the LCA studies. And this is a crucial point, because otherwise there is a big risk of loss of credibility. Now,
Can I interrupt you
yes,
just
of course.
a moment, Paolo?
Yes.
Because I think we make this debate more lively. You are so correct, just to tell you, that the European Commission is now developing a new methodology, which is called environmental footprint, to calculate the environmental impact of different products through an unbiased, scientifically based and consented methodologies. No more left to the different, let's say, groups of experts that do define, as you said, the boundary condition, the methodology, and in the same extent they reach results that they cannot compare from different sectors. We will promote in many, in the future, the way to calculate the environmental footprint. So the environmental impact, whenever you do consider a filiera, a product or a new activity, including social attempt. Now, this will be done by this scientifically methodology, which is called environmental footprint, which has been developed here by the GSC, fully endorsed by DG Environment and also DG Grow. So this is a step ahead in Europe. I think that this is a very important, exactly what you said. We can try to again, to put remediation to something which was, I fully agree, totally random.
I would not be so negative about the past. It's a question of learning with doing, but the crucial important is the link between the institutional setting and the scientific advice. And this is also important. There are other good examples in Brazil, in California. The important thing is that this is accepted, because otherwise this is tricky. My second point, and I conclude very rapidly, there are many institutional barriers when you start to really think about the bioeconomy. Then this does not depend anymore by the Ministry of Energy, but it gets into the Ministry of Agriculture, and sometimes it's the Ministry of Economic Development for the food products. I will not quote the country, but it happened to us a couple of times to speak okay, we would like also to discuss the bioenergy, and the response of the ministry was, no, sorry, we are not going to do that because we don't even speak with the Ministry of Agriculture. I would just like to stress that this kind of problem still exists in many countries, and it is really fundamentally important that institutionally you get all the relevant actors around the table, what has been already also mentioned by Orno and Monique. But I would like to stress that in many countries this still does not happen, and I see this as a phenomenal barrier to address. Thank you. We have lost the moderator.
Yeah.
Non sento niente.
Noi ti sentiamo però.
Adesso sì, adesso li risento.
Questa conferma.
Okay, sorry, because I lost connection, and now I will try to reconnect myself. Is now okay. So you mentioned again exactly these possible barriers. So also the trade with other countries. So again, I would like to go back again to Jennifer, because if you do look at the European situation now for the introduction of this bioeconomy at international level, how to make it more resilient, how do you see now the different supply chain? Do you think that we can have a real sustainable bioeconomy implementation action plan in Europe, taking pride from the different technology progress everywhere in the world, and making a kind of good trading of different goods? Because this is, again, the resilience is going to, which has been shown by the COVID. Now the resilience is very much linked to the source of primary sources. So can you tell us whether you do agree on this possible future positive view of the bioeconomy in Europe, considering in the worldwide context?
Yes, I do. Thank you for the question. I absolutely do believe that we can have a thriving bioeconomy in Europe. I think there's a couple of things that we have to consider. And one is that we need to have a large number of solutions. There is enough feedstock in Europe, and there are enough approaches if we don't try to just do everything with one feedstock, with one approach. I think that's the most important thing. We really need to harness the power of distributed production and a multitude of approaches to be successful. So I do think we can create this in Europe. And I would also say that we need to be extremely careful to really focus on bioeconomy as distributed production, and not try to make a bioconversion plant look like a refinery, because it cannot. And if we don't think differently, we will not be successful. So I do believe we can do it in Europe, and I think we can do it sustainably. And to be honest, not only is it important from a resilience perspective to do more local work in Europe, it is also important to create more distributed systems, because as climate change becomes more intense, we cannot just have big facilities that can be taken out by a single storm. So resilience is, again, about distributing, about numbering up, about really leveraging the biotechnology.
Thank you, Jennifer. I personally think that resilience for Europe will come also from the clear intention of our president to make Europe as a champ worldwide, in application of this kind of principle. For example, for the next summit in China for biodiversity, we will bring our strategy, which means how to put the protection of environment at the center of the possible future development of any policy, from agriculture to blue economy to the forest management. So if we do get in this direction, I think everywhere in the world will be more resilient. But this is exactly the point. There are so many different sectors of industry, so many different stakeholders, so many different parts of the society that are now need to be linked much better together. Otherwise, everybody will go on their own way, and it will be difficult time to find a common point. Now, I would like to continue forever, but I think that Heinz is already asking me to open the final open debate with the audience. So I just wonder, and I ask Heinz, what type of question are we, by the time, gained from the audience, and maybe you can raise yourself to me, and I will try to distribute it.
Okay, thank you very much, Giovanni. Well, there are two quite interesting questions, and one is, could you explain the concept of distributed production more, please? That's one. And I say already the second one because it's very, very broad, and it goes probably to more of the panelists, which is about the water footprint of biomass conversion processes, and the additional wastewater generated remains a critical issue for dry countries. I was wondering if the panel has an idea of how much water is required in terms of biomass to meet the 1.5 degree target. So that's an outreach into water resources, but I think we can start with the first one, just a short statement on distributed production.
I think that maybe, I don't know, you mentioned before the local dimension of possible final solution for agriculture and forest. So this distributed production, which I think is quite correct for the acceptability of people, could be one of the key novelty. So what do you think about possible distributed production?
Do you want me to try to address that?
Yes.
You too, yes. I think I know Monique and everybody. And you,
go and I will rebound.
Yes.
Okay. Arnaud, do you want to go first?
No.
Okay. So distribute. No, none of that. Exactly. Well said. So distributed production. So means that instead of having large volumes of product at one central location, like you do in refining, what you do instead is you are able to harness carbon in a lot of different locations and put up a production unit, a small selective production unit in very many different cases. And that's what distributed means versus centralized. And it is based on a chemical engineering principle called numbering up, building a lot of the same thing, many of them, versus scaling up, which is making bigger and bigger and bigger units. Arnaud?
Thank you, Jennifer. Arnaud?
Here is I think it's part of the solution. I mentioned it earlier on, and forgot to mention something as well about forestry and wood. The fact that when we are looking at, let's say, bioenergy coming from forests, we are also looking at secondary products. So we have to get an industry and a use for the, let's say, primary use of wood. So in terms of construction, for example, there we may look at local solution and local use and local distribution. We may look at some number of other bio resources as well in terms of construction, locally available and locally, let's say, interesting in terms of economy, limiting the transportation. So I think it's one way to look at the future. Decentralization of energy, of resources for construction, of resources for the wood and manufacturing is something that needs to be built locally.
Yes, I simply say that the diversified Europe should be a kind of source of richness. It's not a problem, it's not a barrier. So just to have, for example, this new European Union soil map. This will be an observatory which will try to get profit and tell you what is the best resources, how to optimize the production in any areas of Europe. So I do agree with Jennifer, if we do localize and we do try to maximize the production of different resources, we need to know where we start from. So the soil production will start from a better understanding of the soil quantity, of the soil quality, of the soil property. And this is one of the key issues that the European Commission will provide the consumer and also the producer. So a soil map whereby you can say better how the benefit can come. Now, for the second question, the water footprint in general, as I said, I don't know, I can ask maybe Monique if she knows about the waste and water footprint from biomass, even if I do know myself that it's very much depending on the biomass you consider, very much depending on the production chain, the distribution. But again, over to you, Monique, if you want to reply.
If I may, I would just add some comments on the first question, especially about when you speak about distributed production. In fact, behind you need to rethink the process, and perhaps imagine not to scale up by volume, but imagine a scale up by multiplying the number of smaller processes, and for developing cascading approach is not so simple, but you need in fact to have to imagine reverse engineering, and because you first process like a pre-treatment of biomass, for example. In fact, depending on your pre-treatment, you can have interesting molecule or not. You can have just one molecule, or you can have plenty of molecule with high value. So we need to think by design this cascading approach. As I think it's not so easy. It's very motivated for research. I think it could be the opportunity for a lot of innovation, but especially in France, very often we are thinking about very big refinery complex. We want to have just one solution, and I think that's fully agree with Jennifer. There is not just one solution. There is a lot of solution, but we need to adapt also process and the way we think about this. I have no idea what's about the footprint of biomass. It's so dependent, but what we are looking is for example to use to make first because of climate change, you need to sometime to have some irrigation to have enough production of biomass, but you can imagine that you can use reuse water to make this irrigation, and so you have also a cycle of water could be very interesting to take into account. But I have no real data on this.
No, but I agree with you, Monique. It's impossible to have just a standard quantity of water per biomass, because it depends which biomass. If you produce corn or maize, or where. So I think that exactly. So I think that it's just to have a glue that in the future, energy, environment will be and water will be linked together. So we do have in the Commission water, energy, and ecosystems, because where you do need to produce energy, for example, you do need to have water, but water is also important for agriculture, for many other issues. So I think we need to see in the future together how to plan ahead water, energy, agriculture, food production, and preservation of ecosystem. Next question, Heinz.
Yeah, there is one question still which would take longer, and I'm afraid that we have to pass over now to the second panel.
Okay.
Because we are
okay. So we can
And
Okay, I think
left over, which I would ask the panelists that they try to reply them. Everybody can reply them format on the screen. But we go now ahead to the next panel.
Okay, so we can close the first panel, which I had the honor to chair. I may ask, just including me, just one last statement that you gain from this debate, and then we can close. So a few seconds each, please. So we can start from Arnaud, and then we go to Monique, Paul, and Jennifer.
Thanks, Giovanni. To conclude quickly, I think, as we mentioned several times this morning, bioeconomy is the future of Europe. I mean, we are classical and historical agricultural continent, and it will continue. And I think it's a modern way and a modern form of agriculture. It's bioeconomy in its large definition. Thanks. And I have to quit you. Bye.
Thank you. Monique?
Yes, Giovanni. I believe that the sustainable bioeconomy will only be able, in fact, to develop on the basis of scientific knowledge, and the role of research seems for me very crucial to propose both long-term systemic approaches and contribute to innovative solutions for adaptation and mitigation to climate change. This is very important. And I think that even if the research timeline is more longer than the policy timeline, research provide useful expertise to find quick and clean solution.
Thank you, Monique. Paolo?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. To me, looking at the multiple products and the multiple benefits of the uses of biomass is absolutely essential to get a sustainable use of bioenergy and biomass more in general, both in the environmental terms and in economic terms. I praise the increased attention of the European Commission in that, but I really repeat that there has to be attention on the institutional settings and the institutional organization in many countries to pass from words to real policy, real development. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paolo. Jennifer?
I would say very simply what we all know. Our world is on fire. We need to do something, and we need to do it quickly. I think the bioeconomy has the potential to have a great impact on a sustainable future, and also in the job creation that we need to enable our economies to come out of the COVID crisis. So I think we can do this together, but we need to do it, and we need to do it in a coordinated, rapid fashion. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Jennifer. So very last statement from my side, being myself the Director for Research and Innovation, the European Commission, I can simply confirm that bioeconomy is a transversal cross-cutting issue central for the future of Europe, which definitely needs an integrated cross-cutting science. And just to make you aware, the GRC has developed the Bioeconomy Knowledge Center. So the Bioeconomy Knowledge Center is the entry point for whoever wants to work and get acquainted about the latest progress in the European Commission bioeconomy. We have produced the Biodiversity Knowledge Center. So again, the entry point for what the Commission is doing and will do on the biodiversity. The Forest, EU Forest Observatory, the EU Soil Observatory, and finally the Knowledge Center or Earth Observation Copernicus, which will be the final enabler for any kind of modernization and digitization of policy. So you see, Commission is providing the best ever possible. We do try to develop the best ever possible support to the bioeconomy strategy, bioeconomy policy, because it's very complex, very transversal. So I want to thank again very much all the panelists, very distinguished panelists. So from Arnaud to Monique, Paolo, Jennifer, and of course I hand over to Heinz and all the organizers in Florence. I want to thank Angela and the others for again having invited me to host this very first opening session of this extremely interesting EUBCE virtual version. Thank you very much, and over to you, Heinz.
Oh, thank you so much, Giovanni, and all the panelists. And we try to get now into the second part of this big debate, which has the subtitle Bioenergy in the Green Deal. in international competition with low oil prices. As for bioenergy, it becomes more difficult to compete with fossil fuels. We have seen the falling oil price, and we will look a little bit, trying a little bit in this debate what repercussions this can have on Europe's Green Deal strategy. So it's more about energy, and it's not a surprise that the moderator is well known for you. At least 1 hour. It's Paulo Frankl again, who's changing hat now. Good luck with the debate, and I will again watch the questions which come from the audience later. So Paulo Frankl, it's your floor.
Thank you, Heinz, very much. Of course, I would like to say immediately we are running late with respect to the program, but we will keep around this panel session for the next hour. Now, you introduced correctly the 2 points. The Green Deal, so the recovery packages, how to include bioenergy in this recovery package. And then second, the problem of the competition with low oil prices. Now, let me take before introducing the different panelists, which I will introduce one by one, let me spend only 2 minutes on the prospect and the point of view of the IEA on these two issues. First, we did a damage assessment of the impact of the COVID crisis on all fuels. You certainly have seen that, including renewables. And unfortunately, bioenergy, heat, and biofuels are hit more severely than other renewables, in particular renewable power. So we estimate that in 2020, there will be a 15% production drop, a net drop in 2020. And this is, of course, not good news, neither for the climate, nor for the economy, nor for the sector. Now, the IEA was the first international organization vocal on the necessity of include clean energy transitions in the economic recovery packages. And we published on the 18th of June a special report on sustainable recovery, which basically includes 30 measures for $3 trillion plan over 3 years, covering all fuels and technologies, which would create 9 million jobs per year. And I would like to repeat that the first priority at the moment are jobs. An enhanced economic growth by 1.1%, and this analysis was done together with IMF. And then, very importantly, for the emissions, it would lead to minus 4.5 gigatons of CO2 annual emissions by 2023, relegating 2019 forever as the year of the peak of emissions. Now, the question is, how does bioenergy fit in all that? In our analysis, we saw with interest that the bioenergy and biofuels are labor intense. This is a good perspective for job creation. So when you look at work multipliers, the amount of job created per $1 million spending, this for the bioenergy sector, this is more than 25 jobs per million, which is higher than other sectors. And we estimated that around 300, even more than 300,000 additional jobs worldwide could be created in biofuels. And for those who are interested, let me also mention that these and other themes will be discussed in a Clean Energy Transition Summit organized this week on Thursday, 9 July, which will be live streamed for those who are interested. But now the question is, how does this translate to Europe, to the European Green Deal? We have a set of very distinguished panel, and I would like to give the floor immediately. The first point is we have a video from Her Excellency Minister Claude Turmes, who is the Minister of Energy of Luxembourg. So I pass the line to you again, Heinz, for the setting to pass the video of Claude. Thank you. Heinz and the host, can I ask for your help to pass the video?
Dear Paolo, dear friends, all of you who listen to this important conference, this time I wanted to be in a forest. And I wanted to be deliberately in a forest because I think that biomass policies, energy from biomass policies will change. When back in 2008 I was the rapporteur, the draftsman for the European Renewable Energy Directive, where basically we started to promote energy from wood or from biomass. We were in a different situation. At that time we tried to move or to start to move renewable energy. Today the situation has changed. Today it is much more about biodiversity. We are in a biodiversity crisis. We are in a climate urgency, which means that capturing CO2 by bringing wood not to burn it, but to bring it into buildings will have much more attention, and COVID will also lead to more attention to air pollution. And we know that one of the difficulties of energy from wood is that if we don't do it in very sophisticated burning, that we have too many particles. So we will continue to have a biomass energy policy or wood burning policy, but the priorities must change. We have to go really away from co-firing, drags and other projects where wood is burned in very low efficiency. Coal power plants has destroyed the image of the industry. We have to stop this, and we have to be part of a more holistic way of biomass approach. The first priority will be biodiversity. So we will have to care much more for keeping biodiversity, and when we are replanting, to do it in a way to not to have monocultures, but to pay attention to biodiversity. The second thing which will dramatically change is most of the wood in future will go directly to the building sector, because that is a carbon sequestration instrument. So wood which goes to building will be sequestrated, will in a certain sense take away CO2 for decades because it is bunkered in buildings. And the energy for wood for burning will be reduced to waste, using the waste wood from recycling. That's exactly what we are doing in Luxembourg. So we have reorientated our policies. We are using today, for example, with Kronospan, who has a big industry in Luxembourg, we are using waste wood to produce wooden panels for construction or for furniture. This, we do it in very high efficient processes which have 90% plus efficiency, contrary to co-firing where we have not even efficiencies, often of 30%. Maybe a last word on pellets ovens. I think after COVID and more attention to air pollution, we will still have some pellets, but it will be done in areas where we have very low air pollution, and also the pellet oven industry will have to put more attention to filter away the particles. So that's my best guess. Biodiversity, wood in buildings to sequestrate the CO2, the wood for energy will be mainly from waste, and it will have to be done in very sophisticated processing, filtering out the particles. So that's my message to you. Sorry for not being able now to debate with you my priorities, and have nice days, and nice greetings to Angela, who has basically featured this conference over years and years, and enjoy the discussions this year virtually, and hopefully soon again collectively, physically, in a nice conference room.
So a big thanks to Claude for his video, which I think is also a perfect transition from session 1 to session 2. Now, the point is that Claude poses us an additional challenge. So not only we had two questions, how can bioenergy compete with fossil fuels in a regime of low demand and low oil prices? How can we include it in the recovery measures? Now he asked a third part, which is at the same time, how can we do this in a broader approach that maximizes the carbon efficiency? And this also means having technology innovation and other initiatives. I would like to give the floor now to the panelists, looking first of all at the European level with Giulio Volpi, who is policy coordinator, also responsible on renewables and CCS and policy at the European Commission. Please, all the speakers, try to limit your intervention to 3 minutes in order then to have more Q&A afterwards. Giulio, the floor is yours to illustrate us the main point of the European Green Deal and bioenergy. Thank you.
Hello to everyone. Thank you very much, Paolo, for the floor. Thank to everyone, particularly the conference organizers and all the scientists all over the world attending this conference. I would like to first give the apologies of Paula Breo Marquez, who was not able to attend this conference due to the very busy last-minute negotiations around two important new initiatives that the Commission is about to approve, a strategy on the integration of the energy system, and as well as strategy on hydrogen. Why we are about to adopt such two strategies as part of the European Green Deal, which has been already presented by the previous speakers, is because we have made incredible progress over the last 10, 15 years in developing renewable energies, and particularly in the power sector. We've been also making progress on energy efficiency, as well as integrating our gas and electricity sectors. But we need to do more. As you know, the European Union has set a goal to become the first economy to be carbon neutral by 2050. And we are examining how this is possible through increasing our emission reduction target by 50 or possibly 55% in a reasonable way. And on this subject, we'll be adopting a plan in the fall. But if we want to get carbon neutrality, we need to accelerate policies to work. And we also need to look at, in a different way, our energy system. The model of the past model, where we built on separate energy carriers, separate value chains, and separate markets, cannot deliver climate neutrality. For instance, our analysis shows that by 2050, electricity will provide half of the energy that we will consume in Europe. And by the same date, the electricity supply will be fully decarbonized, with over 80% of such supply coming from renewables. So electricity can do a lot, but cannot do it all. We will need to deploy cleaner fuels, such as advanced biofuels and biogas and renewable hydrogen, in those sectors where it's not yet cost-effective or feasible to electrify. And all these elements will be looked at in a comprehensive way in the strategy that will be adopted by the European Commission on energy system integration this Wednesday. In addition, this year, the Commission will also adopt a number of new initiatives, including a strategy to double the level of building refurbishment in order to accelerate energy efficiency. This is so-called the renovation wave. We will also adopt a strategy to promote offshore energy and to look at how to develop European value chains in that sector. And of course, a speaker before me highlighted the role of networks, and we will review the regulation and European policy on trans-European energy networks, because we need to make sure that our investment framework for our policy framework for investment in the grid is fit for our climate neutrality target. In this context, we know that bioenergy will continue to play a key role. As you all know, already delivers more than 10% of energy in the European Union. And
you have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. And we all know all the many advantages of bioenergy. In a nutshell, is a sector that generates a turnover of 60 billion, over 66 billion euros in Europe, and provide over 700,000 jobs. All scenarios tell us that bioenergy will need to play a role for the decarbonization of the European economy. But to continue to play such a role, we need two key elements. We need to make sure that bioenergy will deliver more flexibility to the energy system, and we need to ensure sustainability. In particular, regarding flexibility, renewables, gases, and liquids produced from biomass or renewable or low carbon hydrogen can offer solutions allowing to increase storage and exploiting synergies between the electricity sector, the gas sector, and the use sector. On sustainability, our key priority will be to ensure a swift and robust implementation of the EU sustainability criteria, which have been just strengthened through the recast of the Renewable Energy Directive. And we'll be also looking more closely at the climate and biodiversity impacts of biomass supply and demand, both in Europe and globally. And to this end, the Commission will publish a new study by the end of the year. I will conclude here. I presented the role of bioenergy in the European Green Deal, and particularly focused on the key challenges of flexibility and sustainability. And I'm looking forward to the debate. Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you, Giulio. From the European perspective, we cross the Atlantic and we go to the US. I would like to give the floor to Jim Spaeth from US DOE Energy Efficiency and Renewables, and also our ex-co-chair of the IA Bioenergy Technology Collaboration Program. Jim, the floor is yours, please, in 4 minutes, no longer than that. Thank you.
Good morning. So it's a pleasure to speak to you from the United States and offer a little bit of a different perspective. In the United States, there's currently not a new Green Deal per se that has been passed. However, there is a lot of legislation that has been considered along the lines of the Green Deal. For example, just last week, a bill was introduced in Congress that would mandate 100% net zero emissions by 2050 and net negative emissions beyond 2050. However, this is just in the early stages of debate. However, this administration strongly supports bioenergy and the bioeconomy. This administration has mandated 6 key industries of the future, and one of those is biotechnology, and the bioeconomy is one of those. It's of course part of the biotechnology initiative. I work for the U.S. Department of Energy Biotechnology's office, and our budget has increased over 25% in the last 2 years. Currently, our budget is about $260 million a year. In addition, there's another entity within the Department of Energy called the Office of Science that spends several $100 million a year on very fundamental research related to bioenergy and the bio discovery and biosciences. There's also a multi-agency board across many agencies of the U.S. government that includes the Environmental Protection Agency that creates policy, the U.S. Department of Agriculture that helps develop, of course, the agricultural resources and techniques, feedstocks that we need for bioenergy, the Department of Defense, which could be a key user of bioenergy and biofuels, among others. Turning from national to the local scene, many of you have heard, and Paulo has mentioned, the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard. The Low Carbon Fuel Standard has been a major attractor of investment in the United States. Almost all bioenergy and biofuel projects that are being developed are targeting it as the point of sale. For example, if you're selling fuel into the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, you can get approximately a $2 per gallon additional incentive to produce your biofuel and sell it in California. Most of the low carbon credits related to bioenergy in California have been by renewable bioenergy gas in the last few years. However, there's a great interest, as an example, in renewable diesel. Renewable diesel has no limits to its blending levels, and it produced about 20% of the pool in 2019 and is expected to double that to about 40% in 2020. There's great investment attraction going on in California. We heard from Jennifer earlier, and LanzaTech is one of the technologies that is being developed for an agricultural waste plant to ethanol in Central California. So this topic also mentions the difficulty of competing head-to-head with fossil fuels. Indeed, it is difficult currently for biofuels to compete head-to-head with fossil fuels or gasoline or petrol for light-duty vehicles. However, we still need cleaner technologies for medium and heavy-duty vehicles, as well as aviation and marine, as is well known in this space. So biofuels is one of the only viable solutions, in particular for aviation, that can be available in the next few decades. It will take support and appreciation of the markets to be able to be viable, but we in the United States plan to spend considerable investment in these areas and have considerable interest. Thank you for your time.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you so much also for respecting the time. Now, I would like to go back to Europe, because there is one country that is particularly vocal and present in the bioenergy field. I would like to go to France and invite our friend Jean-Louis Ball, the president of the Syndicat des Énergies Renouvelables, in making your 4 minutes intervention. Jean-Louis, the floor is yours. Thank you. We cannot hear you. You're muted, Jean-Louis.
Just a minute. Is it okay now?
Yes, now we can hear you, but I cannot still see you. Yes, now I even see you.
Perfect. Thank you, Paulo. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present the main lines of the French strategy in bioenergy sectors and the vision of my organization. My organization, Syndicat des Énergies Renouvelables, is the main French professional organization in the field of renewable energy technology. We gather more than 400 companies representing all the renewable technologies, including all forms of bioenergy, wood energy, biofuels, biogas, and waste. The French government has adopted this year a midterm strategy for the current decade to reduce greenhouse gas emission and to develop renewable energy. The renewable share in the mix has to grow from 17% now to 33% in 2030. Approximately 50% of this growth will be realized by the diverse bioenergy, wood energy mainly for heating, but also for combined heat and power, biofuels for transportation, biogas mainly for injection in the gas grid. Renewable energy represents today 20% of heating energy consumption, with the objective to reach 38% in 2030, mostly with solid biomass. In the gas consumption, renewable represent today less than 1%, but with a strong dynamism, and the target is 10% in 2030. In the transportation sector, renewable share is 9%, mostly with biofuels, with the objective of 15% in 2030. All these objectives are realistic and can be achieved. The government has set up a package of appropriate incentive measures. The main barrier is the low price of fossil energy today, even before the sanitary crisis. So the CO2 pricing is a fundamental issue and will be the basis of the energy transition, both at national level, but also at the European level. Without carbon price signal, there will be no change in the behavior of economic actors. Last point, the impact of this energy transition, the development of renewable, will be very positive for European and national economies. We estimate that in France, there are approximately, in the field of bioenergy, 90,000 jobs today and 130 in 2030. The added value for the French economy will grow from 8 billion euro today, only for bioenergy, to more than 12 billion at the end of the decade. Job creation and added value will profit all the French regions and mainly rural areas. It represents in 2030 more than an increase of 1% GDP. So,
Jean-Louis, 1 minute.
Yes, energy transition must be a priority in the European Recovery Plan, as mentioned in the introduction by David Chiaramonti. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jean-Louis, to stress a couple of things, many things, but in particular the part of the job creation and the value added to the local communities, and in particular the rural communities. I will come back to this. Now, without further ado, I would like now to go to industry. And so far, Gloria, you are the chair of LSB Advanced Biofuels Coalition. You are the head of public affairs and technology innovation from Clariant. Give us, please, the perspective of industry, and don't hesitate to point the finger on the things that are still needed in order to transform things from blah, blah to real action. Gloria, thank you.
Okay, Paolo, and everybody, good morning or good day. I actually brought you some slides which I will share now, and I hope that you can see them already.
We can.
Good. So just a quick introduction from my side. I'm currently chairing the Advanced Biofuels Coalition, and in my day job, I'm responsible for public affairs at Clariant, a global player in the specialty chemicals industry. And at Clariant, we are licensing our sunliquid technology to produce advanced biofuels out of agricultural residues. And on Thursday, my colleague Paolo Corvo will actually give a first-hand update on our commercial activities surrounding sunliquid. So don't miss out on that one. But as I said, today I am representing the Advanced Biofuels Coalition, which is a coalition of currently 11 highly innovative companies from very different industrial backgrounds. For example, chemicals, pulp and paper, biofuels, engineering, or mineral oil. And we all have the same vision, which is to bring advanced biofuels from niche to norm, and by that to make a very strong contribution to reducing transport emissions through advanced biofuels. And in order to achieve these climate targets of the EU, we clearly need to drastically reduce emissions from the transport sector. However, we're actually still rather going the wrong way, with road transport emissions in the European Union still increasing. So there's really immediate action needed in transport. With COVID-19, we actually do see a positive effect on emissions. I brought you this map of China, and also David Chiaramonti this morning showed similar pictures. You can actually clearly see reduced emissions due to the lockdown and the consequent downturn in economic activity. But this obviously is a snapshot of the status today. And we really need to learn from the past, where we had emissions going down also as an effect of crises, for example, the financial crisis in 2008 or 2009. And then we saw actually extensive rebound effects once the economy went on an upswing again. So we really need to be smart and make the right policy decisions right now in order to be able to cut emissions and to bring actually a structural decline in emissions for the next decades. And I believe that we really need to understand this situation as a unique opportunity to improve the situation lastingly and for the future. And the Green Deal and the Green Recovery Program are crucial to set the right path. And we really have the chance to build back better from this crisis and to firmly anchor advanced biofuels in the future fuel mix. So how can we achieve that? First and foremost, we must not backtrack. And we need to ensure continuity of existing biofuels policy and build on what is already in place in the European Union and elsewhere. For example, the Renewable Energy Directive, and do not reinvent the policy framework completely, as this would really lead to uncertainty for investors. We need to reassess existing fossil fuel subsidies and taxation regimes. For example, again, with a European lens, when we see the Energy Taxation Directive, that clearly would need to be brought in line with existing climate goals. And we also need to make biofuels and the bioeconomy an integral part of the recovery programs that are now coming up at European level, but also at the national levels. And on my last slide, I actually would like to show you that we have an excellent industrial basis to build on for this green recovery. Since the adoption of the RED II, we have seen substantial investments in advanced biofuels production capacity. And you can see on this slide an overview of the liquid fuels space here. And from a technology point of view, we are today actually much better situated than we were in 2008 or 2009 with the last crisis. Back then, most of the novel sustainable technologies were still at a demo stage. And those technologies are now at a mature stage and ready for use. So let's use this opportunity and build back better. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Gloria, and also thank you for quoting the IEA several times, explicitly and implicitly.
You're welcome.
Now, Freddie, you are the last one. Freddie Stermos, sorry, let me start my video as well. Starmos, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, is the Vice President for Generation Fuels and Dry Bulks at Argus. Now, someone quoted it, yes, it is difficult to compete, but you have this sense every day. What is the gap in terms of price today between the bioenergy and biofuels, and how difficult it is to compete, and what should be done in order to address this challenge? I count on you to have a view which is not just necessarily bio-friendly, but to really point the finger on the challenges as not just the potential. Freddie.
Paolo, excuse me, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone at the EUBCE for organising this conference, but also for inviting me to share some thoughts. And I think the panelists have done a very good job so far, not just on this panel, but in the previous sessions, mapping out the policy scenarios and so on. And as you say, Paolo, my view is more from the industry. And just to respond directly to the question, Paolo, regarding what needs to be done to bridge the gap, I think that there are several issues at play here. But I think the key one, and it's one that Gloria highlighted in her presentation just a short while ago, is providing clarity to investors. So, my takeaway so far from listening to my esteemed colleagues talking about the policy situation, the way that things are evolving, and particularly the way that things are going to evolve in response to this immediate crisis, with the impact on the economies of Europe and further afield as a consequence of COVID. I think that my main point would be that the biomass and certainly biofuels markets at the moment are significantly larger than they were 2, 3, 4 years ago, but they experience very much the same cycles as a much more mature commodity market. So the title of this panel refers directly to oil prices and how low they are, and how the biomass and biofuels can compete. I think a large part of the issue at the moment is that because of the relative maturity of other commodity markets such as crude oil, and the mechanisms that are available in those markets to effectively protect value over a longer period of time, they are almost completely absent in biomass and biofuel, certainly more biomass markets, and this is problematic. So when you marry a relatively uncertain policy outlook, a policy outlook that is in a state of flux at the moment, with these this kind of lack of ability to kind of protect value or defend value over a period of time, it becomes quite problematic from an investor's point of view, where an investor is seeking a degree of clarity over a medium to long period of time, and this ultimately is going to potentially detrimentally impact the kind of growth of biomass as a fuel in electricity generation. As my colleague Giulio mentioned during his opening presentation, electricity is going to account for 50% of all energy consumption in the next few decades. So I think that there needs to be much more of a focus, not just on the policy and regulation kind of governing how that market should operate, but also the actual mechanisms within the market to allow economic actors to actually protect and defend value over longer periods of time.
Thank you, Freddy. This is from a very economic point of view. Now, I would like to start the discussion with a few provocative questions. The first maybe is touching on something that you just said about the role of electricity. Now, can I say a little bit provocative, and Giulio, you will apologize, that in the communication that I heard so far around the European Green Deal, there is a lot about electromobility, there is a lot about flexibility, there is a lot about system integration and so on. And so if I want to say it provocatively, is there really space for biofuels in the economic recovery package? Who wants to respond to this? It can be Giulio, but it can also be Gloria. Are the recovery packages right now serious about bioenergy? Sorry if I'm a little bit blunt in asking question now. Giulio.
Perhaps just a first very, very short answer.
Yes.
Yes, there is. And it will be even more clear on Wednesday when the Commission will publish its energy integration strategy. As I said before, there is a lot of hype and we see all the advantages of electrification, but electrification cannot do it all. For the hard to decarbonize sectors, we will need advanced liquid and gaseous fuels, renewable fuels, including biofuels, including biogas, including renewable hydrogen. There are important drivers in the Renewable Energy Directive for these sectors and for these fuels. And of course, the Renewable Energy Directive, the revised Renewable Energy Directive is still to be implemented. There is a deadline by member states, June 2021. So we are working hard to make sure that it will be implemented in a robust and swift way to make these drivers ready for the market and for investors.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Giulio. Gloria, do you want to comment on that, or Giulio's answer is enough?
Well, I'm very happy about Giulio's answer. And well, I think my only comment is really that, well, actually bioenergy and biofuels need to be part of the recovery plan, and they need to be part of the Green Deal. Otherwise, we will not be able to meet the climate targets. So there can't be any other answer to your question than the one Giulio already gave.
That this is good, and I'm happy about the answer as well. But let me now continue the provocation. Now, when we look at the past, the experience with recovery packages, we have the experience of 2009 and 10. Basically, you could make one observation: that the efficient measures were on technologies that were decreasing costs, on industries that were ready to go for an upscale, and then, of course, you could use existing measures like taxation and so on. Now, in the case of bioenergy, there is a lot being prepared, but the scale up is not yet there. So there is still a lot of technology innovation, which is not necessarily always very good in economic recovery packages. The promises for reducing costs is not clear. What I hear is a call for higher energy prices. And Jean-Louis was explicit on the role of carbon pricing. But introducing a new tax in a moment where the economy is suffering is a very delicate point. And Jean-Louis, this question is really directly to you. I mean, you know better than me the Gilets jaunes already pre-COVID crisis. How would you now convince the population that introducing a carbon pricing right now is the way to fill the gap with technologies? Sorry, I'm provocative again deliberately. With technologies that not necessarily deliver the promise to be cheaper in the future. We have, at this moment, the main preoccupation is creating jobs, is economic recovery, and I'm really playing the devil advocate here. So how would you respond to that, Jean-Louis? And then anyone who wants to intervene, how do we fill this gap, and how we let the population accept that? Jean-Louis, if you can start, and then Freddie or whoever else want to intervene.
Thank you, Paolo. What happened in France 2 years ago with the Gilets jaunes, the yellow jersey? We have set in France 6 years ago a carbon tax starting from €7 per ton of CO2. And it was supposed to increase each year to reach €100 per ton at the end of the decade. The problem was that the product of this tax was dedicated only to the general budget of the state, not redistributed to the energy transition, and particularly for the people who has lower revenues. So what we propose is to reinitiate the progress of this CO2 tax, but attribute the products to the collectivities, the local communities, and to the low revenue people.
May I add something here, Paolo?
Please, please, Freddie. Please, yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, I think we have a very good case study in the UK for the introduction of additional carbon taxes, punitive carbon price floor regimes, and I think that over the past 6 or 7 years since the carbon price floor was introduced in the UK, we can see exactly the very direct impact or consequence that it had, which is to reduce coal burn to practically zero, and that would not have happened without the introduction of the carbon price floor. So I think having a tax regime which is relatively more punitive on coal-fired generation is essential. I mean, I think it's worth making clear that part of the massive reduction in coal burn that we've seen in the UK is attributable to that, but another part of it is actually attributable to relative economics versus other fuels such as gas, where we've had a very sort of low gas price environment for a couple of years now across Europe, but in the UK as well. But the two things, so the regulation on the one hand, the tax system, and the relative competitiveness of other fuels have practically eliminated coal burn in the UK. So just to reiterate.
Freddie, I like your point. Sorry for intervening, but just to be continuing being a little bit provocative. But in that case, you had gas at low prices as a competitor, and also the promise of very cheap offshore wind. In this case, still nobody of the panelists has responded to my simple question: what is the price gap today between oil and advanced biofuels, and how we close this gap? And the situation, to be very, again, provocative, can be difficult for policymakers. You have to have a lot of political courage to absorb. I'm not saying I'm deliberately provoking, but the situation is not the same, like in the UK. Jean-Louis has a very good point on the reallocation of the income of the CO2 price. This is a crucial point for social acceptance. Gloria, do you want to comment on this price issue and taxation as well? Or anybody else? I don't know whether Jim is still connected or he has lost connections, I'm afraid. Gloria, please.
Well, actually, with regards to the question of whether or not to introduce a CO2 tax or tax element on transportation fuels, I think the question is really how you go about that, and you need to do it obviously in a smart way. And there might be one option to also shift taxes so that the overall burden on the consumer actually stays more or less the same, but you still have a certain steering momentum. I'm bringing that up because Germany, for example, as response to the COVID crisis, is reducing right now for 3 months the value-added taxes for 3%. So there could be possibly ways and means to move more towards a system where you would actually tax that, well, those things, those fuels that you burn, and maybe go away from a situation where you are taxed well, very high on your income, obviously, but also on everything you consume, basically. So I think that there are smart ways of doing so. More specifically, with regards to how to overcome this actually widening price gap or cost gap between advanced biofuels and fossil fuels, I think there probably we can't only rely on taxation. It needs to be an element in the overall equation, but it won't bring us off the ground. So we really need to have a continuation and a visibility of where are we going with the Renewable Energy Directive, how are we going to increase the targets that are set there without changing too much of the overall framework, because that would mean a lot of investors' uncertainty. We should also be looking at the Fuel Quality Directive, a piece of legislation that hasn't been changed as often as the Renewable Energy Directive, but which entails actually an obligation to reduce the greenhouse gas emission saving from fuels you put on the market in Europe. So this is a very interesting piece of legislation and a very interesting screw to turn in order to incentivize the increased use of alternative renewable low carbon fuels.
Thank you, Gloria. This is actually a very good hook for one question that we are getting from the audience, which comes from Adrian Brown. How do you perceive, and it's about attracting private capital, attracting the investors, how do you perceive that green bonds, environmental impact bonds, and other green financial instruments could be utilized to diversify and get access to green capital from global investors? Does anyone from the panelists want to respond to that? Maybe Freddie?
Perhaps I can have a
quick Giulio, please.
reply,
Go ahead.
and also linking to what being said by Gloria and other panelists. So advanced biofuels and renewable liquid and gas of biofuels are needed. That's very clear. All scenarios shows that. The economic crisis make them less competitive. We need to increase technology innovation, of course, but also increase the production at economical scale. How do we do that? Through two ways. First, through clear volumes, mandates, and we think that the Renewable Energy Directive, for those that perhaps are not familiar, because we're addressing a wider public, the European Union has just revised its Renewable Energy Directive with new targets on renewable and low carbon fuels in the transport sector, a 14% share by 2030, including a very significant sub-target for advanced biofuels and biogas of 3.5%. And we feel that this is going to drive demand. We are seeing the slides presented by Gloria shows the significant investments that are taking place in order to meet that demand. Of course, secondly, we need a little capital. And I think here we have a real opportunity from the post-recovery, the post-pandemic recovery package. At European level, for the first time, we've presented, we will make available to businesses and governments 750 billion euros in form of grants and loans. And the priority will be to invest in the Green Deal, as well as the energy transition, as well as the digital transition. So money will be available. But public money is not going to be enough. We know that we need much more in order to deliver those scales, to deliver the carbon neutrality, and that's where the private capital is important. But the private investment needs a clear taxonomy on what is green. And that's why the Commission, through its financial sustainable investment plan, as well as the regulation on the taxonomy of sustainable investments, is providing a clear roadmap, a clear blueprint on what is sustainable. Thanks.
These are a very important element. Any other? Yeah, Freddie, please.
Yeah, just to say that I agree with everything that Giulio said, having the public funding, but also the private funding within a very well defined, very clearly defined policy framework. But I think that my observations of the market are that that there is actually an appetite on the private capital side to invest in such things as green bonds and to sort of diversify away from fossil fuel investments. We've seen company after company, we've seen sovereign wealth fund after sovereign wealth funds actively look to diversify away from fossil fuel investments and towards more green investments, essentially. So I think that the appetite is there. As Giulio says, it has to be very clearly defined as to what a green investor is actually investing in. But at the same time, with that appetite and capital coming in, it could be a very good opportunity for the market on the whole.
Thank you, Freddie. We are running out of time, but I will still want to give the opportunity from other questions to the floor. So I go to, thank you. Good to see you back, Jim. Heinz, the guru behind the scene. How do you have another one or maximum two interesting questions, and then we have to go to the closing? Heinz.
Yeah, thank you for giving the floor. Well, actually, I have two, but one seems to be relatively difficult to answer. So let us see how fast we are with the first one, which is from Diana Powers. She's asking a very interesting point. To what extent can a bioeconomy reuse the future stranded assets and infrastructure of the fossil fuel economy, for example, refineries replace? I think in a time where we see a very good protection of the fossil industry or lawsuits against governments which wants to get out from coal industry or paying high compensation, I think it's a very, very important question. I think this goes on one hand, I think to Gloria maybe, or to Freddie, I would suggest.
And I guess it's not just about the refineries, but also gas pipelines and every asset that are at risk. Anyone wants to comment? Very good question.
Well, perhaps sorry, Gloria, you've unmuted at the same time. So
go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, I'll just make a quick comment, just referring to the case study in the UK again, which is effectively bringing about a carbon price regime which was extremely punitive on coal-fired generators, to the point where most of the coal-fired generators have closed the power stations over the past 6 or 7 years, and I think it's just been accepted within the kind of market cycle, as long as it's planned effectively. Obviously coal-fired generators have huge overheads around insurance that they have to pay in terms of the major outages that they have to, where they perform the key maintenance. And it seems as though that's been kind of accepted within the business cycle. I can't really talk for refineries or pipelines, so but that's just my observation.
Maybe one comment adding on to what Freddie just said. For actually advanced biofuels, especially the liquid advanced biofuels, they have one very big advantage, which is actually that they can use existing infrastructure, both with regards to existing cars, with the existing distribution network, filling station, etc. Storage capacities, not to forget those. So this is really a big advantage, because you can continue to use many assets you have already been putting in place. with regards to let's say the refinery assets, there are options to also convert existing refineries to biorefineries. Obviously, now since I represent LSB here and a bunch of companies, it's a bit difficult to go into individual details. But there are a lot of options to tap into the existing infrastructure so that we do not lose all of our economic activities that we have built up around oil, basically. And I also believe that this is a very valid question when we look also at the infrastructure costs that are needed in order to bring renewables into, onto the road and into the system.
And I think really good points, well raised, Gloria. And I think that the key is that a lot of companies have seen this as an opportunity rather than something to shy away from. And on the power generation side, we've seen across Europe, a lot of plants have closed, but a lot have actually be converted or adapted or modified in order to embrace the new regime. Really, I'm thinking about Drax. I'm thinking about some of the Dutch and Belgian plants. So yeah, more of an opportunity for some.
Jim, do you want to intervene? I mean, the
yes,
US administration is also very vocal on all fuels, all technology. So this question of stranded asset and the use of existing asset is a good one. You want to comment?
Can you hear me? Excellent.
We hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm on the phone. Yes, I'll offer a couple examples that are really excellent examples, in particular for biofuels. One of the opportunities that are being researched, not only in the US, but I believe worldwide, is co-processing of bio-oils in existing refineries. It could be one of the most cost-effective routes for basically matching biofuels and fossil fuels. And then looking back to our Jennifer, speaking from Lanzatech, her technology is being piloted and now commercialized around the world using industrial off-gases, whether they be steel or other metal processing or other industrial off-gases. So there's an excellent example of not displacing existing fossil fuel type producing assets, but co-locating and harmonizing with them and making synergistic partnerships. So there's some really great examples of how biofuels and bioenergy can meet together and partner with other fossil fuel assets to produce a cleaner product.
Jim, thank you so much for these excellent examples. I feel we have to go to the closure. So Heinz, I have one question to you. I see a good number of other Q&A coming in the chat. So I invite you or the panelists to answer separately. Heinz, any other suggestions for this?
No, I think at the moment there would be one small one, but that would be go directly, I think, to Julio, which is about what is about import carbon taxes. I think
Julio,
very detailed question, short answer.
Yes, exactly. You only have 10 seconds to answer. Otherwise, you can take more time and answer separately, because I feel we really have to go to the closure.
Yeah, I'll take more time also because it's a bit unclear, the question.
Understood.
But,
now, I would like now to ask you, each of you. Heinz, please.
I just wanted to confirm also the audience, all the questions will be answered also offline, and I invite the panelists to help in answering this. This remains open in the Q&A part, and so I encourage everybody to answer just typing in the question, the answer.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Heinz. Now, before we close, I would like everybody, every panelist, to give a 30-second statement on the following. Because in the end, when we really want to scale up, we really to attract investors. So if you can say your single most top priority in order to attract investors in the bioenergy field in the coming years, connected with the economic recovery. I'm just speaking about the next 36 months, if you identify one single priority, what would you choose? You only have one option, not two. Who wants to start? Nobody.
I can start.
Well,
Jim, please go ahead.
Okay. So I'd say what we need is successful commercial pioneer and demonstration plants to prove that the technology and the financing packages can come together, and that will help attract further investments and create markets and outputs.
Very good one. Gloria, please.
My number one would be policy stability for increased investor security and to support a solid business case.
And who wants to go next?
What?
Sorry, John. Yeah.
I agree with Gloria. There is no problem to attract a private investor in the field of PV or wind, because there is in this technology a very stable frame, and we have to be inspired by this example for bioenergy.
Okay. Freddie?
Yeah, I think policy stability and market stability. I think the market needs to develop and adapt the mechanisms for effectively managing price risk, credit risk, supply chain risk over a longer period of time. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to see these very, very violent price cycles, which ultimately deter activity rather than encourage.
Julio, you have the last word.
Yeah, so to conclude, I guess the message is to provide such a policy stability, but also increase the ambition of the European climate goals. As I said before, by September, the Commission will publish a new climate plan with the target of reducing emissions by 50%, possibly by 55. And then we also will look at whether the renewable energy legislation as well as the energy efficiency needs some adjustment in order to meet such a higher ambition. And I think this will be only good news for the sector, because we'll look at how to strengthen the measures to promote the deployment of renewable energy in the energy sector. Thank you.
Very good. Of course, the last word is with me, not with you, but I just want to add the fact that the IEA will continue to look very closely on how we can include bioenergy in economic recovery packages. We recognize that this is more difficult than other sectors for a variety of reasons that we have heard, but we also in this panel have heard very interesting ideas which are very practical, from carbon pricing, from successful commercial pioneering technologies, good examples of how using existing assets. What is needed is collectively to say a positive narrative about bioenergy, and count on the IEA to do that, starting, I repeat, from this Clean Energy Transition Summit that will be live streamed in 3 days from now. With that, and with only 43 minutes of delay to the original program, I would like to close this session and ask the audience to unite with me in a virtual applause to my panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Heinz, what is the next? The floor goes to you now.
Okay, thank you. I think it's very good that we concluded this. We were a little bit more relaxed on the timing because we are virtual. Now, it's really a pleasure for me, and with a certain excitement, now it's the first virtual lunch break of this conference. Now, what is this virtual lunch break? During the lunch break, the first decision you need to take, what do I eat? But the second, which you need to take, what I'm doing in the afternoon, and we go, I hope you come back to us at 14, so 2 o'clock p.m. And now the choice is very difficult because you can do a lot of things. You can, during the lunch break, you can also go try out our networking feature, meet people, search for friends, and then you can chat with them, or you can organize something. Don't forget to stroll through the exhibition. And that's a quite interesting setting there, and it's a real novelty on this virtual conference. Then in the afternoon, I want to announce already the event organized by the European Commission on incorporating efficient bioenergy for industry. So that's really quite an interesting side event. I mentioned this first because all these events you can join free of charge. You don't need to be a fully registered participant. You can be a visitor for them. But if you are registered fully to this conference, there are other things which you need to go. And most of all, the scientific program in the afternoon, which is divided into 3 parallel tracks. Also for this, you need to decide. So do you go in the track of biomass resources or in that of solid biomass combustion? Or do you look into this bio-based products, which allows you to see the bridge to the bioeconomy? So that's a choice to make. And as if this would not be sufficient, there are also the posters to look at, and this is very nice. So the virtual poster hall is probably even more exciting. So in this sense, I wish you an interesting lunch break, decisions. And in particular, I love to welcome you back at sharply at 14:00. Goodbye, and thank you for participating in the opening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.